Blog Talk Radio.
All right, everybody. I'm Tarhaka, Amana El Bay, and tonight, part one, Untaught Information about Ancient Moors in America. Now, what we want to do here this evening is I want to put everything as best I could in alphabetical order so that you will clearly understand what has transpired, what you're up against, the lies that's being propagated and peddled as truth. We're going to unravel some stuff here in an attempt to get the record straight. Now, when if you hear me use the word black or African American or something like that, I am talking about the Moors. If I run a plug and you hear such a thing, we are talking about the Moors, okay? We're not talking about a nationless people. Now we're going to start with the continents first. Let's get this down to a science first. And I've been dealing with this for quite a while, and I come to one conclusion that's so important. I don't think a lot of us understand the significance of this information. I'm going to put it out again. I'm not going to run it all now. I'm going to put enough of it out there for you to get the gist. Because in the minds of people, and I keep finding this out, you would think after all this time and all this information coming out about the Moors, I mean there's a tremendous amount of information coming out that has never came out before, never been seen, but it's coming out, and you still got people want to try to ignore this information and tell you something about the same lies that they've been telling for years and years and years. They refuse to acknowledge anything different. Well, tonight we're going to be a little bit different. We're going to deal with the following. Was America oldest of the land masses on earth? Now, when it comes to the flood, the waters covering the earth, what was the first land that emerged? Was it America or was it Africa? What was it? Where? Were people called Moors today the first occupants on this land? Were people called today Egyptians on this land also? What is the true ethnicity of the ancient Olmac people? Are Negroes, coloreds, blacks, African Americans, and Afro-Americans, do they belong, are they a part of the human family of nations on earth? What is an Indian? Where did the word come from? Who came out with that? What kind of people on earth created the word race? In what school, college, or university is the truth about these questions being taught? These are some of the things we're going to be dealing with. I got about 17 questions here on my paper for my outline. But without further ado, I'm going into my first plug. Now, we're going to deal with the works of Louis Agassiz. Now, a lot of people say, well, he was a racist. Okay, maybe so. But was what he said true or not? That's the only thing I want to know. I don't care what you say it was. All right, here we go.
I want to show you some things that I don't think you even knew existed. It goes against everything Manifest Destiny teaches about Native Americans. And I want you to know this part of our history because people erased it. And we'll get to that later on in the program. Erased it intentionally. Erased it intentionally. That's an important part of it.
Hawa. What's up, family? Thank you for being here once again. I hope you like this new series that I'm bringing to you guys, The Untold Ancient American Truth. There's going to be so many parts of this because there's so many different topics, there's so much information, and just like Glenn Beck just told us, a lot of this has been intentionally erased and intentionally left out of the school textbooks, So you know nothing about this information. You assume everything has already been studied, that it has been taught, that it has already been discussed and explained. But like Bob said, right? Half the story has never been told. So now you see the light. Oh, stand up for your right. Alright, so in this first part, what I want to show is some information I found here, and it's actually from a person named Agassiz. I'm gonna let you know who he is. He's actually one of the most renowned and respected geologists that has existed, basically. So we're gonna talk about what he has to say about America and how it is the true old world. Alright, we're also gonna read from a book I found. I thought it was really good, and we're gonna start reading from the book Traditions of the Earliest Visits of Foreigners to North America by Ruben Duret. And we're going to go to page 70 here, as it says here on the top, Traditions of the Earliest Americans. It says America, the oldest of the continent. After the discovery by Columbus in the latter part of the 15th century, it was customary to speak of the Eastern Hemisphere as the Old World, and the Western as the New. No one seemed to care how long the Western Hemisphere may have existed before this discovery. The discovery was new, and therefore the country was deemed new also. After the discovery by Columbus made it known, many alleged discoverers, before unheard of, came into existence from different nations. Besides the 6 discoveries set forth in this article, there were Arabians and Italians and Dutch and Poles, Japanese, Jews, we're talking about Hebrews, and others who laid claim to this honor. None of these, however, could make out a satisfactory claim to its discovery, and it may not have been possible to satisfy all doubts in any one case. We knew that the Eastern Hemisphere existed and had existed for thousands of years, but disregarding the claims of some of the ancients, we did not certainly know of the Western world until it was discovered by Columbus, and as the discovery was new, the country discovered was called new also. Alright, so it says they actually disregarded the claims of some of the ancients. And again, we've been also referencing that, when they're talking about their mythos or their mythology or religion, ancient accounts, like I'm talking about the Egyptians and Babylonians and Assyrians, they're really talking about, as Ignatius Donnelly says, Atlantis or the Atlantis gods, or what happened in America in ancient times, the true old world. All right, so they disregarded those claims of some of these ancients. We have no certain way of arriving at the age of continents or of determining the relative age of any one of them, especially if the age is to be calculated in years. Geologists get over the difficulty of estimating in years by the use of such terms as eras, ages, periods, epochs, etc. They will tell you what geological age a thing belongs to by the fossils embedded in it, but when they undertake to tell the year in which anything existed, it is by estimation only. Alright, so they're letting you know that they can't really ever tell the exact year that something is. They give it, they reference it by epochs and eras, right? Like they say the Pleistocene era, right? So they don't know what exact year. He's basically letting you know. It's all guess and estimation only. Professor.
Okay, now, you got that part. They don't run it all, but you can go right there on YouTube and just type in America, the old world, and you get the whole scoop on it. But the major thing, the point that I want to get out is how they went about falsifying information in regards to this land. We already know that not only the Europeans colonized most of the civilized world, but the most dangerous thing that they did was colonize information about the world. Now that throws us back years and years. That throws the whole human race back when they mess with that. But let's go look at some of the other perpetrators and see what they done. We're gonna deal with this, and then I'm gonna deal with the thing about anthropology. We're gonna deal with that tonight. Okay, so hold on.
By the last decades of the 19th century, Darwin's theory was increasingly popular among Germany's intellectual elite. Darwin had claimed that humans and other mammals were the product of what he called natural selection, a blind struggle for existence where the fittest survived and reproduced, and the less fit died off. In his book, The Descent of Man, Darwin made clear that his idea of natural selection had implications for human society.
Charles Darwin clearly was a social Darwinist. He was not as rabid a social Darwinist as some of his followers later on, but he clearly did believe that Darwinism should be applied to human societies.
Darwin worried that civilized societies were harming humanity by helping the poor, caring for the sick, and otherwise saving those whom nature would have killed off. Darwin feared that such humanitarianism could eventually destroy the human race. Darwin also predicted that in the future, the civilized races of mankind would exterminate the inferior ones. Darwin himself was ambivalent about some of the social implications of his theory. But in Germany, Darwin's ideas supplied a new generation of political leaders, social thinkers, and scientists with what they regarded as a biological justification for world domination.
If you read the scientists of the day in the late 19th and early 20th century, many of them were promoting racism and even racial extermination, extinction of races. They were promoting the gaining of living space. They were promoting competition, the things that we know of as social Darwinism. These were things being promoted by Charles Darwin himself to some degree, many other leading biologists.
The war of annihilation is a natural law, without which the organic world could not continue to exist at all. German zoologist Gustav Jaeger, 1870. Just as in nature, the struggle for existence is the moving principle of evolution and perfection, so also in world history, the destruction of the weaker nations through the stronger is a postulate of progress. German ethnologist Friedrich Hellwald, 1875. According to Darwin's theory, wars have always been of the greatest importance for the general progress of the human species. The physically weaker, the less intelligent, the morally lower, must give place to the stronger. German biologist Heinrich Ziegler, 1893.
Not all German Darwinists defended war as a biological imperative. Some, in fact, criticized it for undermining natural selection. They feared that wars in Europe would kill off too many of the superior races. Yet even these pacifist Darwinists tended to approve of wars waged against races they considered lower on the evolutionary scale, like the native peoples of Africa. And it was in Germany's colony in southwest Africa, now known as Namibia, that the social Darwinism of German military leaders moved from theory to practice in the years leading up to World War I. Between 1904 and 1908, the German military attempted to eradicate the Herero people in southwest Africa in what some scholars consider the first genocide of the 20th century. On October 2nd, 1904, General Lothar von Trotha issued what became known as his extermination order, declaring that the Hereros either had to leave German southwest Africa or face extinction. Herero men would be executed, and Herero women and children would be driven into the desert where they would die of starvation or dehydration. Von Trotha justified his extermination campaign by an explicit appeal to social Darwinism, telling one newspaper that human feelings of philanthropy could not override the law of Darwin's the struggle of the fittest. When von Trotha's extermination campaign provoked a backlash in Germany, a new plan was developed to move the remaining Hereros to concentration camps, where many more would ultimately die from malnutrition, disease, and exhaustion. In these death camps, the Hereros were subjected to medical experiments by German doctors, and their skulls were collected for shipment back to Germany to be studied by experts in racial science. By 1908, it's estimated that more than 80% of the Herero people had been eliminated from German Southwest Africa. Back in Europe, meanwhile, German military leaders prepared for the next conflict on their continent. In 1912, German General Friedrich von Bernhardi published his bestseller, Germany and the Next War. Bernhardi argued that the struggle for existence is, in the life of nature, the basis of all healthy development. Therefore, war is a biological necessity. Similar ideas could be found among the military leaders of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Count Franz Conrad von Hotzendorf has been called by one scholar the architect of the apocalypse for his formative role in World War I. The chief of the General Staff of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, von Hotzendorf, read Darwin as a young officer, and he soon applied the Darwinian worldview to his ideas about foreign relations. After World War I started, many German thinkers invoked Darwinian theory to justify the conflict, including prominent zoologist Ernst Haeckel, previously a pacifist.
Once it got going, there were many people who argued that it was a part of the Darwinian struggle for existence. Ernst Haeckel even wrote a book during the war in which he called it part of the struggle for existence, in which he argued that the perfidious French were using black colonial troops against the superior Germans, and he found that horrifying that they would do such a thing. And so there were many people who were justifying the war on a as part of the Darwinian struggle for existence.
In the end, Germany and its allies lost the First World War. But the ideology of social Darwinism that inspired its academic and military leaders survived for another day. Among the defeated soldiers of the German war machine was a young corporal in the Bavarian army. Intensely bitter at the defeat of Germany and its allies, the corporal found new purpose for his life by embracing an even more fanatical social Darwinism than that which had been adopted by the leaders of the Second Reich. Within 2 decades, the whole world would know the corporal's name.
Unser deutsches Volk siegt ein! Sieg 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 ein!
Okay, we back. Now, what did you hear? What did you see that time? What we have here is a people who took an ideology and fashioned it and shaped it into something that they continue to use to this very day to subjugate and attack and undermine the peoples of the planet. Isn't that something? Here's a guy that concocted some information about what he thought about something and peddled it to the point that other people, well, hey, this sounds about right. We need to get down there because it sounds about right, and we need to take this in and do something with it. All right, now, we're going to get down into the actual thinking and the actual mentality of the apparatus that is responsible for any time you come up with truth, you're under attack. As long as you chugging and jiving, you ain't doing nothing. You staying in your place, so to speak. You're not actually thinking to the point that you're going to take positive action. You all right. But as long as when you start doing that, oh no, we got it. You know, you messing up the ideology. Let's take a look at now anthropology. Let's take a look at it, and let's do this very, very quickly.
You might think that the concepts surrounding race and racism have been around forever. The truth is, though, that the concepts of race and the categories of black and white are not only relatively new, but were created for a very specific reason. Welcome back to another episode of Anthropology in 10 or Less, your basement-based source for anthropological inquiry. I'm Michael Kilman, and today we're going to cover the second part in our multi-part series on race and look at where the modern concept of race and racism come from. There's a false assumption out there that the concept of race and racism have always existed in the world. The truth is that while discrimination has probably always been present throughout human history, the concept of race that we have today definitely wasn't. Humans do have a tendency to create in-groups and out-groups, but those groups have changed radically over history. There's nothing natural about using skin color as a marker for difference. Just ask the Irish. In the mid-1800s, the Irish were not considered white. In fact, they were sometimes called Negroes turned inside out. Germans, Jews, Italians, Greeks, Spanish, and others who we consider white today weren't always considered white. The lack of amount of melanin in your skin, which again results in light skin color, didn't necessarily make you white. So where then does the concept of whiteness and blackness come from? What about race? Well, while it can be a little bit murky in the exact origin, we have a few pieces of evidence that point to a radical shift in our thinking about race. In order to understand our modern concept of race, we have to go back in time to the 1600s in both the Virginia and Maryland colonies. Between 1607 and 1682, about 92,000 immigrants were brought here to these two colonies alone. About 69,000 of them were indentured servants, that is, people who traded a term of labor to pay for their trip to the Americas. These contracts often included a guarantee of freedom and a land grant after the contract was fulfilled. It is really important to understand that while many of these laborers were British, there were also laborers from African nations, Portugal, Spain, France, Turkey, and Ireland. These laborers lived, worked, ate, and slept together in the exact same conditions, regardless of skin color or geographical origin. In fact, indentured servants of African descent earned their freedom just like their European counterparts. At that point, both Africans or Europeans were allowed to own land, vote, run for public office, testify in court, own slaves, own indentured servants, and marry any person of the opposite sex, regardless of skin color. In short, there was no distinction based on skin color. But in the mid-1600s, things changed. There was a huge shortage of females in the colonies. In fact, there was a 10-to-1 ratio. The wealthy white landowners created a law in 1664 to prohibit marriage between British women and slaves. What we would consider interracial marriage today was both a common and accepted practice. In fact, records from the 1660s show that almost a quarter of all children were born to European women had mixed ancestry. But in the mid-1660s, several other factors changed. 1. There was a labor shortage. The flow of indentured workers had started to slow significantly, and as a result, landholders began to turn to an increased slave population. 2. Conditions between both indentured servants and slaves became much more harsh. For servants, even a minor infraction would increase the term of a labor contract, sometimes for years. And even when those labor contracts were up, there was little or no land available to be granted them as per their contract, because at this point, most of the land was either taken over by friends of the king or the wealthy elite. 3. Tobacco prices fell as the number of farms producing it increased, which caused the local economy to suffer and worsen the living conditions in the colonies. While it's true that slaves were clearly at the bottom of the totem pole, the living conditions for poor servants had also become severe. 4. In 1670, a law was passed that removed a vote from anyone who did not own land, further restricting newly freed laborers from changing policies that might discriminate against them. And 5. Along comes a man named Nathaniel Bacon, who united these groups to fight back. Now, Bacon was no saint. As a white landowner, he had his own agenda, and in 1675, Bacon developed a plan to take land from several Native American tribes in the area in order to acquire land for himself and his supporters. But the ruling class refused to allow their militia to help attack the Native American population. In retaliation, Bacon began a public campaign against the wealthy and criticized their treatment of the poor. He convinced some small landowners to join him. He demanded an end to slavery and made false promises of amnesty to slaves. And then, finally, after a year of planning and building a coalition, Bacon united the servants, slaves, and the poor landowners against the wealthy elite and Governor William Berkeley. On September 19, 1676, Bacon and his coalition burned the colonial capital of Jamestown to the ground. Governor Berkeley fled across the river. Later, he returned with a fresh contingent of British troops and took back the city. Some of Bacon's followers were hanged, but Bacon himself died of dysentery before Berkeley regained the city. So why are we talking about a class uprising? Well, because these events changed everything. The rebellion scared the hell out of the wealthy elite, and the first thing they did was begin phasing out the use of servants and began recruiting slaves from deeper in Africa who had no experience with the English language. This prevented effective communication or resistance. But still fearful, the wealthy elite and local lawmakers relied upon a divide and conquer approach. Over the next few decades, they passed a series of laws that created categorical differences for all new colonists. Those laborers of European origins were given more privileges and rights than those laborers of African descent. This later came to be known as a racial bribe. Servants' contracts were now honored, and they were insured land at the end of their terms. In 1681, we see the very first law that creates the categories of white and black to mark the distinction between the two populations. In the decades that followed, many laws were created. Free blacks were no longer allowed to hold office. Their right to vote was removed. Blacks were no longer allowed to testify in courts against whites. Blacks were no longer allowed to possess weapons. Blacks could receive public lashings for raising a hand against any white person. And over time, most free blacks found themselves in slavery as a result of minor legal infractions. On the other side, free whites were granted greater access to Native American lands. White servants were allowed to police slaves, and barriers were created between the areas where they had previously cohabitated. This gave the poor whites a perceived stake in the control of the colonies. Though their conditions did not actually change much, the wealthy elite had convinced them that it had through the creation of the categories of black and white. Through this, the concept of race was born, and it was born for the specific purpose of controlling the poor. In other words, the concept of race was born as a tool of class control. I should note, in many ways, this hasn't gone away, but we'll talk about that in another episode. By the 1750s, there was a culture born in the colonies and in Europe that fostered the idea of racial superiority. White supremacy was born. This coalesced when the botanist by the name of Carlinus Linnaeus began the creation of taxonomies. Now, Linnaeus was really important in biology and science because he realized that in order for science to progress, we needed clear-cut classifications of plants and animals. Kingdom, class, phylum, order, family, genus, species. Kingdom, class, phylum, order, family, genus, species. Man, my 7th grade biology teacher, Miss Dalton, would be proud that I still have that memorized. But when Linnaeus finished with plants and animals, he looked at human beings. In 1767, he published a book called Systema Naturae. In the first volume, he classified 4 distinct species, or races, of man. He later added additional categories, but here are his first 4 classifications. Homo afro, from Africa. Their qualities were described as black, phlegmatic, relaxed, crafty, indolent, negligent, anoint self with grease, and governed by caprice. Homo asiaticus, from Asia. Their qualities were described as sallow, melancholy, stiff, severe, haughty, avaricious, covered with loose garments, governed by opinion. Homo americus, from the Americas. Their qualities were described as red, caloric, erect, obstinate, merry, and free, paint self with red lines, regulated by custom. And finally, Homo europaeus, from Europe. Their qualities were described as white, sanguine, muscular, gentle, acute, and inventive, covered with closed vestments and governed by laws. Now, to be fair, Linnaeus didn't invent these ideas on his own. Most of them came from the American colonies where the concepts of race and racism were born. But Linnaeus did help to make race, quote, scientific. And the horrors that followed became justified by, quote, science and reason during the Age of Enlightenment and beyond. But before we go today, I want to be clear that while science was used to further racism for many years, it was in fact science, specifically genetics and physical anthropology, that have shown us that the concepts of race and racism have no factual basis. But we'll cover that in a future episode. In the next part of our series on race, we'll explore race in the 19th century and the rise of things like the eugenics movement, human zoos, and social Darwinism. See you next time.
All right, we back, everybody. Okay, there you go. In a nutshell, just an ideology. The same thing that Hitler used in building up the German people to attack the world. The same ideology is going on today. It permeates the school system. We are under the impression that we can go into a school system in the United States and get an education which leads to wisdom. You can't do that because if they allow that to happen, then you could not be exploited. So therefore, we'll give you information that's masquerading as education, but in reality is nothing more than indoctrination. Now, I know here lately you heard a whole lot of people talking about, well, I got these college degrees, I got a bachelor's degree, I got a master's degree, but the field that I'm employed in, the career that I have, don't match what I was educated to do. It's amazing. We have to stand back, step back, and look at the forest, then you can see the trees. But if you're too close, you can't see the big picture. So you have to look back. And that's what these shows are designed to do, is to provide you with food for thought so you can make changes. This is part 1 on untaught information about ancient Moors in the Americas. I'm going to a commercial break. We're coming back to this kind of information, but we're going to deal with who's who in America, when they was here, and all this other stuff, and what really happened. We're going to deal with that. We're building the foundation now. We're going to build it. I'm going to this commercial break, and I'll be right back.
Today in September 2023, the United States is bringing up the student loan thing again, just like I said they would in 2022. And a lot of people took no action back then. They advertised they would give you a loan to go to school, but you don't receive a check. But anyway, you go for it. The next thing you know, you get a bill in the mail for a loan they said they gave you. And guess what? It has interest attached to it. And as time goes on, it gets bigger and bigger because it was never meant to be paid off. It was designed for you to pay for the rest of your natural life. Get my free report. Go to TarhakaDebtElimination.org. That's TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Become a creditor instead of a debtor. Get into private. Get out of the public. Peace.
All right, we're back. Keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, the chat room is open. Y'all be courteous up in there. The number to dial into the broadcast is 563-999-3443. Press 1 on your phone. That'll give me an indication that you have something to say. But as for right now, I haven't opened up the phone lines just yet. So y'all sit tight because I got to get this information out because I want y'all to really, really understand yada yada. Now, let's reduce this down to the lowest denomination here, and we're going to hear from Mr. Bolson. Let me see where you at here, because we are currently in the election thing. We got the what is the National Democratic Election thing, but let's look at it up front and let's hear what this man got to say about it. Y'all hold on.
Well, it's divide and conquer. I mean, if you wonder why American society is so divided, I mean divided in so many ways. It isn't just that the divides are deep, it's that the divides are so many. Black and white, race against race, advocates of this issue against opponents of this issue, even men against women and women against men. There isn't a single category within that society that doesn't have some corresponding nemesis. It's just divide and conquer, playing out domestically. And Democrats and Republicans is just another one of these divisions, because the country has been conquered by corporate economic imperialists. Look, I don't care who you vote for in November, because power doesn't care who you vote for in November. I've said it before. If you imagine that unelected power of the private sector is going to entrust the public with deciding how things are going to be run and who's going to run things, then you're living in a fantasy. It's absurd. America has subverted, sabotaged, and strangled democracies all around the world. They've been interfering with, tampering with, rigging elections across the globe for decades, from Haiti to Honduras, from Italy to Iran, from Syria to South Africa. They've toppled governments, assassinated elected officials, fixed elections, bribed and bullied and bulldozed democracies on every continent for a century. They don't think that any population in any country in the world can be trusted to elect leaders who will safeguard the interests of the American elite. So what makes you think that they're going to trust you with that power? They rig elections and install whoever they want in country after country, but somehow you think that they're not going to do that in your country. Why, how naive can you be? Listen, the election cycle in America is nothing but a mechanism for what you can call the campaign industrial complex, whereby billions upon billions of dollars of contributions, your money, are funneled into the private sector. I mean, when you donate to a politician or you donate to a candidate, where do you think that money goes? It goes directly to business. You're not doing anything but increase the revenue streams of consultancies, ad agencies, analytics firms, PR firms, media companies, social media companies, digital marketing agencies, events coordinators, on and on. This is nothing but the public providing basically an economic stimulus package to unproductive industries. It's a wealth transfer that you yourselves are participating in. You're literally just donating money to the private sector and getting nothing in return. Getting nothing in return except that you get to watch the most expensive fan fiction movie about democracy ever produced. I mean, look at the Democrats. Kamala Harris was just appointed as the nominee. She wasn't voted for. This is straight up succession, not election. There were no primaries. She hasn't had to outline her policy platform, and no one needs her to do that. All she has to do is to not be Donald Trump. This is the logic of demonization versus policy debate as a campaign strategy. No candidate has to win your approval as long as the whole election is framed in the lesser of two evils scenario. And what's the point of that? To make the pre-programmed win seem plausible, that's all. And to not leave any opening for dissent to manifest that might make the win seem implausible. Because, for instance, if voters actually have demands of this candidate or that candidate, and the candidate fails to address those demands, then it could cast doubt upon their eventual victory. And inevitably, if a candidate does address voter demands, well, that will always end up alienating some other faction of voters. So we don't talk about issues. We don't talk about how to deal with issues. We just rally behind our party's candidate in lockstep, because the other party's candidate is literally the devil incarnate. When you're operating in the lesser of two evils framework, you're always going to have decidedly low expectations of your chosen candidate, and that's perfect when the election is already fraudulent in the first place. So this uncomplicates the rigging process. Yes, I said rigging, and don't think for a second, don't you imagine that that's a conspiracy theory, that the U.S. rigs elections. But between 1946 and 2000, America is documented to have interfered with, tampered with, malignly influenced or outright rigged at least 88 elections from Europe to Latin America to Asia to Africa. So again, if you think that they'll do this everywhere else, but your so-called democracy is pristine, I would have to ask you why you think so. Why would it be more important to the power structure to control the outcome of an election in, say, Guyana than it would be for them to control the outcome of an election in the United States of America? Because yes, Guyana is one of the countries where America rigged elections in the past. I'm telling you, I don't care who you vote for, because power doesn't care who you vote for, because the outcome is not determined by you. You know, Biden stepped aside because his pre-programmed victory could never be convincing. But look, Biden himself, the fact of Biden, a man who is literally in late-stage senility, a man who is visibly disintegrating before our eyes, the very fact that he was not only president, but was absolutely going to be run for another term, despite being a cadaver on strings, that should let you know that power does not reside in that office. Politicians serve two functions. The first is to distract you with the performance of democratic government, and the second is to be effigies that can be burned to satisfy public anger when the policies dictated by the private sector impose misery on the population. So when an American asks me who should they vote for, or when they say that this one is better than that one, or at least not as bad as that one, and what do I think, and so on and so on and so on, well, you may as well be asking me about which Marvel superhero is better than the other, because you're not talking to me about figures who have any real significance with regards to policy. You're not talking to me about figures who actually exert any control over anything. You're not talking about the real existing power structure. You're asking me to give you an opinion about a fictional scenario in which your government wields independent power. As long as you're fixated on this charade, there's no danger whatsoever of you ever having any impact on policy. You're just facilitating and collaborating with the divide and conquer tactics of the owners and controllers of global financialized capital. And I don't know how you can be so propagandized, to be honest. I don't know how you can be so propagandized that you can't even notice that actually your own media does tell you every day that the government is not in charge. I mean, how many times have you read or how many times have you heard in the media, the market will decide? We'll have to see what the market does and so on. But when they say the market, they don't mean you and I. They mean big business, multinational corporations, asset managers, stock market whales, not voters, not citizens, not Democrats, and not Republicans. You live in an oligarchy, and your so-called democracy is only performed as a distraction to keep you from noticing that fact. Now, for this election in the U.S., as I've said, Harris and Trump are just mascots representing two different factions of the OCGFC. And it's going to be just like what happened in Venezuela. The only way that Trump can win is by trying to out-rig the election rigging of the Democrats. But the Democrats are the incumbents, like Maduro was. So they have the advantage of overseeing the succession, and Harris is likely to win. The only thing that Trump can do is to try to boost his own popularity to the point that Harris's pre-programmed victory looks less plausible. But like I said before, it's not musical chairs, where both candidates are walking in circles around the chair until the music stops, and then they have to race for the seat. Kamala is already in the seat, just like Maduro, and it's harder to get someone out of that seat than it is to just sit in it. So it looks like the neocons will probably stay in the White House. And that just means that the real battle between the military-industrial complex OCGFC and the global-oriented OCGFC, that battle is just going to go on a while longer. But if you're fool enough to think that you have to drop everything in order to ensure that Kamala Harris will win and Trump will lose, well, then you're literally like someone who can watch those old Roadrunner cartoons and still get worried and anxious about whether or not the coyote is going to catch him. I mean, I know it's important for you to think that you have some kind of control, but the truth is, the reality is, you're not writing this story, and you're not writing how this story goes. And as long as you think that you are writing how this story goes or participating in it in any way whatsoever, then that just ensures that you will always be nothing but a spectator. Unless and until you redirect your activism towards the private sector, and I mean organize and mobilize with the understanding that, for example, corporations are political entities. So treat them as such, deal with them as such, impose expectations and demands upon them as such. Unless and until you do that, all your get-out-the-vote initiatives, all your campaigning, all your voting will never do anything for social and political change except to ensure that it won't happen. Boeing, for example, just used your government to make around $20 billion. Boeing, Raytheon, and all the other merchants of death and destruction. They just got $20 billion of your money to keep the genocide going in Gaza. That's their policy. Zionism is their policy. Genocide is their policy, and they're doing it for money. And they give almost evenly to the Democrats as they do to the Republicans, except they give slightly more to the Democrats. And it's almost even between what they give to Kamala Harris and to Donald Trump. They contributed a bit more to Harris. I shouldn't actually say contribute, I should say invest, because they give that money as an investment from which they expect astronomical returns, which they will get. These are the entities that control your policy. It's not your ballot, it's their billions. Your government is captured, and your country has been captured, and power and decision-making has been transferred from the public sector to the private sector. Your laws and your policies are written by corporate lawyers, not by congressmen. You know, your democracy has actually become like the British monarchy. It's just an empty tradition. You know, you go out to vote the same way that British people will go out and line the streets just to watch the king pass by on a horse and carriage. It's just a nod to the lore and heritage of your society. It's a ritual that has no real significance beyond the psychological and the emotional. It's a collective, society-wide, self-soothing gesture. America is a corporate authoritarian system cosplaying as a democracy. And everybody around the world sees you. You know, you people who are campaigning for Trump or campaigning for Harris, everyone around the world sees you as someone who's like at a cosplay event and dressed up like Iron Man, but who actually thinks that the buttons on his costume work. We have to elect Trump. or the meteor is going to destroy the Earth. We have to elect Harris, or multi-dimensional aliens will kill us all. You're really invested in the fantasy storyline. But nobody in the world thinks that your democracy exists except for you. Because we know all too well what your democracy looks like when you export it to us. And you have the same one that you sent us, which means that you don't have one either. Look, you are not constituents of politicians, you're constituents of companies. And you need to organize yourselves along these lines. Democratize private sector power. At some point, your activism and your strategy has to actually be informed by the real existing power dynamics in your society, not just by the official version of the power structure that they taught you in civics class. Until you do that, I'm telling you that the harder you work for this party or the harder you work for that party, well, you're doing nothing but fortify and reinforce your own disenfranchisement and your own irrelevance.
Okay. Wow. What y'all think now? Because it's almost time for y'all to go to the polls. The man put it in a nutshell for you. You hold on a minute. Go get your glass of water. Take a break. We'll be back. All right, we're back. Now, let's deal with Negroes, colors, blacks, Afro-Americans, and African Americans a part of the human family of nations on earth? The answer is no. These are labels. The man just told you earlier in this podcast about where all these divisions, these labels, and all this stuff, and the ideology and how all of this came to be, and we got the white supremacy, all this stuff. was created. All you have to do is when somebody tell you, well, this is the United States of America. Okay, well, how long has it been the United States of America, and who was it that created this name? And what was the name of this place before they created it? Well, that is, like I said, this is the, the United States of America. Everybody worldwide, well, this is America. This is America. Yes, but the question still remains. No, these are labels. There's no Negroes, no colors, no blacks, African American, Afro Americans, part of the human family of nations on this planet. No, it does not exist. This is a label. What is an Indian? Where did the word come from? An Indian, the Native American Indian. What? Who? What? Okay. All right. Earlier today, I was on, I think it was it Messenger or TikTok or one of them, where this Native American, he bought a map showing that every inch of ground on the North American continent from one end to the other had a Native American Indian face on it. And yeah, we was, whoa, son, hold on a minute. And when I seen that, other people say, well, this is not the biggest copy they had. It was the second biggest, but I'm going to go and see if I can. You done bought a lie. And then you got other people trying to find out where you get the lie from so they can go buy them a copy of the same lie. Amazing. I said, oh, no, son. So I jumped up in there. When I jumped in the well, by the time I got through dropping us, and our ancient real-life photographs and information up in there, everything will settle down. And I'm going back tomorrow to see if we got some more stragglers. But this was incredible. And this kind of stuff is going on in the minds of people in the United States. But nevertheless, let us take a look, a short look at the hidden history of the African American. Let's get down there and see what that's about.
Since elementary school, Americans have been taught that African Americans came to America as African slaves by the way of the transatlantic slave trade. Many African American elders say otherwise. I remember when I asked my elders some questions about our family origins. My grandmother said that she was Indian and that her mother was a full-blooded Cherokee woman. She also mentioned nothing about slavery. Being that I was too young to understand, I was puzzled. Who do I believe? My elders or my school teachers? Since the beginning of chattel slavery in America, the identity of American Indians has been distorted. When eugenics, immigration, and white bleaching policies increased in the Americas, the desire to eradicate darker Indians with Negro features from American Indian tribes did as well. When racism and colorism collide, you get paper genocide. What does the term paper genocide mean? Paper genocide is when American Indians are labeled as black, white, colored, mulatto, or even Negro. It's worth noting that paper genocide is not limited to American Indians. In fact, indigenous people from all over the world are affected by paper genocide to this day. The concept of race is defined by a person's phenotype, not by their genealogy records. When asked what makes someone black, they will simply state it is because of their dark skin. That is insufficient justification for calling someone black, let alone a misnomer. Before 1900, few American Indians were counted on the federal census. The 1790 to 1840 census do not list American Indians. However, Indians in the general population are first identified in 1860. Conveniently, a fire at the Department of Commerce in 1921 destroyed nearly all of the 1890 census schedules. Beginning with the 1900 census, Indians were counted both on and off reservations. Many believe that these uncounted Indians perished as a result of disease or warfare. However, this is not the case. They were reclassified and erased from history. So how does this act of paper genocide affect American Indian identity? Simple. When the registrar counts and sees him/her as a Negro, many Indians have endured paper genocide and have fought tooth and nail to get their Aboriginal birthrights restored. However, not all of their attempts were successful. Paper genocide shows us that you will always be seen as some nigger regardless of your indigenous documentation.
He calls himself Ghost Dog. I don't know, a lot of these black guys today, these gangster type guys, they all got names like that they make up for themselves.
Huh. He means like the rappers. You know, the rappers, they all got names like that. Snoop Doggy Dogg, Ice Cube, Q-Tip, Method Man. My favorite was always Flavor Flav from Public Enemy.
I don't know anything about that. But it makes me think about Indians. You know, they got names like Red Cloud, Crazy Horse, Running Bear, Black Elk.
That kind of shit.
Yeah, Indians, niggers, same thing.
Please keep in mind that each landmass has its own Aboriginal Negro population. Aboriginal Americans are the original inhabitants of America, and many are labeled as Negroes. Many scholars focus on the narrative that African Americans derived from the millions of African slaves to justify why so many Negroes are in America. The number of Africans shipped to America has been exaggerated and inaccurately reported. Since grade school, Americans were taught that 12 million Africans came to the United States as slaves. However, this teaching is a fabrication. Multiple sources estimate that it was actually 92,000 to 388,000 Africans were shipped to the United States as slaves, not millions. Many people believe tracing African genealogy is impossible and they resort to taking a DNA ancestry test. However, since the arrival of Europeans and Moors in America, they have kept records of both immigrants and Indians, whether slaves or free.
The slavevoyages.org website has now completed 10 years of successful operation, drawing on 4 decades of archival research on 5 continents, a revolution in computer processing costs, and with major funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the UK's Arts and Humanities Research Board, the site now offers access to details of more than 36,000 slave trading voyages between Africa and the New World, a further 11,400 voyages from one part of the Americas to another part of the Americas, and 92,000 Africans who were forced to make these voyages. The role of slave voyages as the basic reference tool for the slave trade to the Americas and now within the Americas is well established.
However, most African Americans lack written proof of their African origins, not because of the white men attempting to conceal it from them, nor is it because of the transatlantic slave trade, but because most African Americans are not African to begin with. Many DNA ancestry companies promise Black Americans that they can trace their origins to an African tribe, and well, I allow the experts to put you up on game about that.
DNA testing can determine where in Africa our forebears were from. Among those using the test to trace their family's past, Spike Lee, Oprah Winfrey, and actor Isaiah Washington, one of the stars of Grey's Anatomy.
To Vi Higginson, the prospect of tracing even a tiny fraction of her ancestry back to Africa was enthralling. 60 Minutes sent her DNA to African Ancestry, as well as to several other genetic genealogy companies, to see what they could tell us about Vi's maternal lineage. So what do we know about Vi's ancestry? The DNA does indicate that she has distant relatives in the Mende tribe, but she also has relatives in all those other tribes. So no one can say for sure where Vi's maternal ancestor actually came from. When I handed Vi the certificate, she got extremely emotional about it. She wept, and it meant so very much.
People want to believe.
They want to believe they've gotten an answer.
And it's not fair of us to let them believe that we're giving them certain answers, because scientifically, we just can't.
Hank Greeley is concerned that the science isn't really there yet for you to be giving them the name of a tribe.
I think for most companies, I would be concerned too.
But what about your own company?
We have
he
the
didn't
largest...
exclude you. He included you.
But we have the largest set of sequences from Africa. And so with that, we're able to provide some level of probability in terms of frequency.
But he would say that even though you have the largest database, it's still small on the scope of things.
As I said, I share those concerns.
About yourself.
Our DNA.
And that's the rub. This business of genetic genealogy is fraught with limitations. For one thing, it can only provide information about a tiny fraction of our ancestry. Because we get half our DNA from our mothers and half from our fathers, almost all of our DNA gets shuffled and remixed every generation, making it impossible to trace what comes from whom. There are just 2 bits of DNA that remain pure: the Y chromosome, which passes directly from father to son, and something called mitochondrial DNA, which passes unchanged from mother to child. Hank Greeley, a law professor at Stanford University, has studied this new field. He worries that people don't realize just how many ancestors they actually have.
8 generations ago, both you and I had 256 great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents.
Wait, you're saying that if you go back 8 generations, we have 256 great-great-great-grandparents?
Yes, it doubles every generation. So you've got 2 parents, you have 4 grandparents, you have 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents, and it adds up fast. It adds up so fast, in fact, that if you go back 20 generations, you've got over 1 million grandparents.
1,048,576 to be exact. And in each generation, DNA testing can provide information about only 2 of them.
So you could be Peruvian on your mother's 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 side, Japanese on your father's 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 side, Swedish on everything else.
And you'll never know.
And you'll never know the Swedish from the Y chromosome or the mitochondrial DNA.
Now, you've looked at several of these companies that are doing these tests.
Yes.
Do you think that they explain what you just explained to us?
No. I don't think any of them does as good a job of pointing out the limitations. But, you know, businesses often don't go around telling you how weak their product is.
We don't oversell. I mean, we just say, look, we provide a service. If you're interested in exploring a tiny bit of your DNA and trace its ancestry, we can do that.
When you say it's a tiny little amount?
It's less than 0.1%.
And that's pretty teeny.
Yeah, but for people who know nothing about any of them, I think it's very important.
The tens of millions of Indians who vanished following 1492 did not all perish in America's Holocaust. Slave catchers would traffic millions of Indians as slaves to Europe and Africa. The slave trade didn't start with Africa. The transatlantic slave trade started in America with American Indians.
When people think of American slavery, they don't think of the enslavement of Native Americans. Why is this?
Well,
partly because the enslavement of Native Americans occurred first, and
say that again, please. Say that again.
The enslavement of Native Americans really began before the enslavement of Africans, not only in the Caribbean by the Spanish, where it was extremely extensive. And in the Caribbean, I might mention that the numbers were huge that were involved, and they had several kinds of slaves. They had the normal slave, but they also had people who were called, they were called Indians from the useless islands. They were from islands where there was no gold. And so they had the right to go and remove people from those islands.
The useless islands?
Yeah,
What
Jamaica, for example, would be a useless island because it had no gold. Inutiles, not useful. And they needed labor so badly on Haiti, where the gold was found, Haiti, and Cuba, that they were stealing people constantly and removing them by force from other islands. Even after it was no longer technically in the best or possible, legally even, to enslave, they still could remove them as forced free labor. We could call it later coolie labor. In the early 1500s, they started bringing in a few African slaves, but they had some second thoughts because many of the Africans ran away and joined the native people. And there were major rebellions, particularly famous on the island of Haiti, led by an Indian chief named Enriquillo or Enriquez, who had Africans as well as Native Americans in his rebellion. There were a number of those. He held off for a little while. They thought the mixture was too dangerous. They were also very worried because some of the Africans, particularly from Senegal, were Muslims. And they didn't want Islam, they didn't want Judaism either, but they didn't want any foreign religion but Christianity spreading in the Americas. In any case, what happened was that about 1520, they began bringing in many more Africans again. So you get, again, the Native American being the first slaves in the region, and then African slaves coming in and supplementing their numbers.
Captured and sold to adjacent counties and towns, American Indians were to work on plantations. Millions of Indians were transported from America to Europe, Spain, the Caribbean, and Africa as a commodity in exchange for resources. Slave traders often wrote these Indians as African slaves, Negro, or black. The United States did not import a massive colony of Africans from Africa. Somehow these details of history are not talked about in school textbooks. In Virginia, records that indicated that someone was of American Indian descent was changed to colored. No matter if the Indian was biracial or not, lawmakers did, however, use the transatlantic slave trade as a scapegoat to justify enforcing eugenics and xenophobic laws. Although very few Africans were sent to America as slaves, Indian agents, census takers, and other registrars had no problem labeling full-blooded and mixed Indians as Negro or colored. According to a German ethnologist in the 1800s named George Frederici, in his analysis of Portuguese sources, he states, and I quote, "Among the regrettable practices which have resulted in the disparagement of the Indians, one prime abuse is the unjustifiable and scandalous practice of calling them Negroes. Perhaps by so doing, the intent was no other than to induce in them the belief that by their origins they had been destined to be the slaves of whites, as is generally conceded by the case of blacks from the coast of Africa. Therefore, the directors will not permit henceforth that anybody may refer to an Indian as a Negro, nor that they may use this epithet among themselves, as is currently the case." The U.S. government is terrified that more American Indians that are now mislabeled as colored, Negro, Black, or even African American may uncover their true history and genetic lineage. The U.S. administration fears this awakening. This is the reason why they went to so many great lengths to do paper genocide on American Indian people so they don't have to give American Indians the payouts. And if they do give the American Indians the payout, they are more than likely to give it to the white Indians or the biracial or multiracial Indians. However, not all Black Americans have the same ancestors, and not all Negro people are of African descent.
Good evening and welcome to For the People, and the final part of our conversation with Dr. Jack Forbes, author of Black Africans and Native Americans. With the enslavement of Native Americans and Africans by Europeans came a maze of racial and caste designations. In this segment, we learned that the term Negro didn't apply just to Africans, but to Native Americans as well.
Well, the Portuguese particularly begin using the term negro or black for a wide variety of people other than people from Africa. They apply the term very commonly to the native people of India and to other areas of Southeast Asia. But when they arrive in Brazil, they also use the term for the native people of Brazil. They call the Indians of Brazil negros da terra, which means the natives of the land. And then later, when they begin bringing people over from Africa, they call them negros da Guiné, black people from Guinea. This term Negro is just used very commonly, interchangeably with Indio. So you become, I become convinced that basically what the Portuguese meant by Negro was non-white. In other words, any group of people who were not white would be categorized that way, and that Indians, therefore, were just another kind of non-whites or Negros. The term was also used in a very similar way by English-speaking people. And not only in Britain, but also in the United States area, you find instances where people who are clearly of Native American ancestry are categorized as Negro or black. The term black is used in English interchangeably with Negro very often, a blackamoor in England. So it's a term that we have to watch out for. In 1719, for instance, the government of South Carolina decreed that all persons who were not full-blood Indians, such as musties and mulattoes, which I'll mention in a moment, would be classified as Negroes. So when we find lists of slaves during that period of time, and subsequently, of course, where it says there were so many Negroes, this does not necessarily mean pure-blood Africans. It can be people of various kinds of Indian and African mixtures. Now, I mentioned a couple of words there, musty and mulatto. Mulatto is a term that developed, I think, in Spain or Portugal, probably derived from an Arabic term, either muwalad, a term meaning one who is assimilated or adopted into the Arabic community, or from the term maula, which means one who has a feudal obligation, including the obligation of parent, of child to parent. In other words, in that system, a son was considered to have a relationship of malado, as it's called in Portuguese, to the patriarch of the family. From either of those terms, or from both coming together, I think the term mulatto evolves. It's not probably originally a racial term per se, but gradually it comes to mean a person who is essentially half African and half something else. But in the West Indies particularly, we see an example after example in the Spanish royal decrees and the definitions that are given by Spanish officials as well as by Native American writers the term mulatto means primarily black and Native American. Not black and white, but black and Native American. Turning to the French colonies, we also find that the term mulat, or its equivalent in French, was used for people of American, Native American, and French ancestry, even without any African ancestry, in the Louisiana area, for instance. And the same thing is true in the British colonies along the Atlantic seaboard. In Virginia in 1705, for instance, the government decrees that the child of an Indian will be known as a mulatto. That is, a person who's half white an Indian, half African an Indian, will be a mulatto legally.
Okay, let me cut you off here because we don't want to keep you here all day. The significance of this being what? What is the lesson? What is this telling us?
Well, there are several things that are significant about it. Of course, one of them is the way that colonialism tries to develop all kinds of elaborate classification terms for different kinds of people. But that's another subject. The most significant thing here is to reveal the much greater amounts of Native American ancestry that are present within the African American population than most people realize, because they might have been misled by the use of terms like mulatto, and also people of color. Colored people included Native Americans, for example, in the United States area.
But even with this classification system, you have this system, this classification system is still working in the interest of the European. Or what? Is that true or what?
Well, it's working in several ways, I think. It works to obscure the relationships between African Americans and other groups. For example, the Mexican American population has a lot of African ancestry. By and large, they don't know that, or the African American population doesn't know that. So it's very difficult to build a bridge of understanding, you see. And what we are lacking in many cases is the realization that even though there are differences, even though we each have our cultures, which we want to protect and keep alive, we have our community traditions, we have different languages in some cases, but nonetheless we have also bonds of kinship. And we shouldn't forget those bonds of kinship.
All right, we back. I hope that shedded a little bit more light on the untaught information about our ancient Moors in the Americas. And we're down to the question that I asked earlier: in what school, college, or university is the truth about these questions that I'm putting out here tonight has been answered? Well, how come we didn't know this in elementary school, junior high school, or high school for that matter? And why is it still not being exposed today so that all of the people will have access to this kind of information and to know this stuff? Why? Nevertheless, we're going to go up here and take another commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to continue, okay? Hold on.
Hi, I'm Tarhaka. You know, there's a difference between what you believe and what you know for a fact and can prove. I live in the private and can prove it. I've exercised my freedom of right to travel and can prove it. I don't have a mortgage and can prove it. And much, much more. And so does many other people across this country and abroad who are secured party and creditors living in the private. Debt is a burden. It causes people a hard time in life. They can't live live in peace fast enough. Contact me at tarhakadebtelimination.org. You can call me and I'll answer the phone. Leave your email information on my website and get my free report. That's tarhakadebtelimination.org. Get out of debt. It's nothing but a burden. You can't move forward with that. That's a bunch of junk.
All right, we're back. Now, let us continue with the Moors. I think in the previous plug that I just played, I think the word more was missing one time. And but what I'm trying to do here, because I don't go around telling people I'm African American. And you're black. No, not black. No, come with something else. Come on, bring something else. Don't come. Don't talk to me. Yeah, hold on.
Do you find yourself confused as a black American about your ancestors? No matter how knowledgeable you are, there is still a doubt about who really were the ancestors of black Americans living today in America. Some theories suggest that all black Americans are descendants of African slaves brought forcibly to America during the transatlantic slave trade. Others suggest that black Americans are a result of intermarriage between African slaves and Native Americans who inhabited the land even before European colonization. However, one theory, which is more of a fact, stays hidden. Perhaps either they don't want you to know this, or they have made this idea sound irrational. Yet, every black American who takes pride in themselves knows what they are and who their ancestors were. Yes, they were the original people. But what does that mean? Let's find out.
The Black History Archives.
Before we start, it's essential to make clear that not all black Americans can trace their ancestry to a single ancestor. In other words, black Americans living in various regions across the United States can have different ancestors, which can be shocking for many. The family's oral traditions determine this and have played a crucial role in shaping beliefs about the ancestry of black Americans. These are not just beliefs, but historic facts passed from one generation to another, preserving the ancestry record. These traditions directly connect to the past, preserving cultural heritage and nurturing a sense of identity and continuity across generations. Through storytelling, elders pass down narratives of their ancestors' experiences, including their struggles, triumphs, and traditions. These stories often delve into details about migration, survival, resistance to oppression, and achievements, providing a personalized perspective on the broader historical narrative of black Americans. By recounting tales of their ancestors, families bridge the gap between different time periods, connecting individuals to their familial roots and ensuring that their legacies endure. This continuity promotes a deeper understanding of personal and collective identity, instilling a sense of responsibility to honor and preserve family history for future generations. While some details of oral traditions may change over time, the core narratives often remain consistent, reflecting enduring themes and values within the family lineage. Therefore, it's safe to believe the oral record various black Americans have about their ancestors because there are more chances of them being right than the record kept by slave owners of that time. The first theory suggests that black Americans are actually descendants of Africans. Today, the DNA and genes of the black Americans have preserved the imprints of their ancestors, and various DNA studies reveal that a significant population of black Americans have African roots. The publicly available DNA study reveals that about 55% of black Americans have African roots. The historical record also proves this because millions of Africans were forcibly brought to the Americas during the transatlantic slave trade. While this traumatic experience led to the severance of familial and cultural bonds, it also created a shared history among black communities in the Americas today. Despite being removed from their ancestral homelands, black Americans maintain a strong connection to Africa as their place of origin. Furthermore, despite enduring the atrocities of slavery and systemic oppression, black Americans have preserved and passed down aspects of African culture across generations. From language and music to dance, spirituality, and cuisine, these cultural elements are tangible reminders of their African heritage and linked to their ancestors' way of life. The second theory suggests that black Americans are descendants of native and indigenous people. Some black Americans believe they have indigenous ancestry, tracing their lineage back to Native American tribes. This belief often arises from family oral traditions, historical records, and genetic ancestry testing. Family oral traditions play a significant role in shaping these beliefs. Many black families have passed down stories of Native American ancestry through generations, preserving the idea of indigenous heritage within their family narratives. Even the genetic studies prove this. Additionally, historical documentation provides further evidence to support these claims. Some black Americans can trace their lineage through documented interactions between African slaves or freed individuals and Native American communities. These records may include marriage certificates, census data, land deeds, and other official documents indicating connections between African and indigenous peoples. The third theory suggests that black Americans have roots in Hebrew Israelites. Some black Americans believe they are descendants of the ancient Israelites mentioned in the Bible, known as the Hebrew Israelites, which can be true. Verses like Song of Solomon or Lamentations are descriptions of the physical appearance of the Israelites, which matches that of black people. Additionally, historical accounts indicate Israelite migration to various parts of Africa, which they believe eventually led to the presence of black populations in America. Furthermore, within specific black American communities, oral traditions assert ancestral ties to the ancient Israelites. These traditions often involve narratives passed down through generations asserting descent from Hebrew or Israelite ancestry. Moreover, some individuals and groups have turned to genetic ancestry testing to bolster their claims of Hebrew Israelite lineage. These tests analyze DNA to identify genetic markers associated with specific populations, and the results are shocking. A connection between Hebrew Israelites and present-day black Americans can be seen. What's more, cultural practices and beliefs among black American communities mirror those of Hebrew Israelites. This includes adherence to dietary laws, the observance of biblical holidays, and the integration of Hebrew language and customs into religious practices. While these cultural similarities exist, they could also be attributed to factors such as religious syncretism and cultural exchange over time. Additionally, historical migration patterns of African peoples, including the transatlantic slave trade, are evidence of the dispersion of Israelite descendants across Africa and eventually to the Americas. The forced migration of Africans resulted in the presence of Hebrew Israelite descendants among black American populations. Here's a reminder to please support us so we can make more videos for you by subscribing to our channel and giving the video a like. We want to build a strong community and we need your support. Let's continue now. The fourth theory suggests that black Americans have actually European ancestry. Because of the enduring legacy of slavery and the history of sexual exploitation and coercion, many black Americans hold the belief that they have European ancestry. Throughout the era of slavery in America, sexual relationships between slaveholders and enslaved individuals were unfortunately commonplace, frequently occurring under circumstances of coercion and exploitation. These relationships were heavily influenced by the unequal power dynamics inherent in the slave system, where enslaved individuals have little to no control or autonomy. Consequently, many black Americans today speculate that they may have European ancestry stemming from these relationships. These beliefs are often passed down through family oral traditions, which may recount stories of ancestors with fairer complexions or European physical features. Historical documents and genealogical research occasionally provide evidence of these connections, further solidifying the belief in European lineage among black Americans. The fifth theory suggests that black Americans have roots in the Caribbean and Latin America. Many black Americans may find their ancestry rooted in the Caribbean or Latin America due to their familial connections to the wider African diaspora, which dispersed across the Americas during the transatlantic slave trade and subsequent migrations. This diaspora facilitated the blending of African cultures with those of indigenous and European populations in various regions, including countries such as Jamaica, Haiti, Trinidad and Tobago, and the Dominican Republic. The transatlantic slave trade forcibly transported millions of Africans to the Americas, where they were subjected to enslavement on plantations and in other labor-intensive industries. Consequently, many black Americans can trace their lineage back to the Caribbean and Latin America, sharing a collective history of colonization, enslavement, and resistance. In the Caribbean, for instance, countries like Jamaica, Haiti, Trinidad, and Tobago, among others, served as significant destinations for enslaved Africans during the colonial era. These regions evolved into hubs of cultural exchange, where African traditions intertwined with those of indigenous peoples and European colonizers. This cultural amalgamation gave rise to distinct languages, music genres, religious practices, and culinary traditions that continue to influence the identities of individuals in the area today. Haiti, in particular, occupies a notable position in the narrative of the African diaspora as the site of the sole successful slave rebellion in history, resulting in the establishment of the first independent black republic in 1804. This pivotal event, known as the Haitian Revolution, not only liberated enslaved Africans but also inspired liberation movements across the Americas. Similarly, countries like Trinidad and Tobago, with their diverse populace of African, Indian, Indigenous, and European descent, showcase the rich cultural mosaic that has emerged from centuries of migration and cultural exchange. For Black Americans with ancestral connections to the Caribbean and Latin America, these ties signify a connection to a broader African diasporic legacy that transcends national boundaries. Then there is a sixth theory that a few people know about. Black Americans are descendants of original black people already living in America before Columbus and slavery. Nobody has ever thought about what the race of Native Americans was. In fact, Native American is considered a race in itself, which is wrong. In reality, Native Americans are the indigenous people who were living on the American continent before Europe colonized it. Therefore, it's possible that various races inhabited the land. However, Europeans, for their ease, considered them all Native Americans. However, the theory suggests that Black Americans are descendants of the original black inhabitants of America before Columbus' arrival and before the onset of slavery, which is commonly known as the pre-Columbian African presence in the Americas theory. This theory challenges the conventional narrative of American history, which predominantly focuses on the arrival of Europeans and the subsequent African slave trade. Advocates of this theory argue that there is evidence suggesting African contact with the Americas long before Columbus's voyage in 1492. Various arguments support this theory. Archaeological evidence and discoveries indicate the presence of Africans in the Americas before Columbus' arrival. For instance, artifacts from the Olmac civilization in Mexico depict individuals with features typically associated with Africans. Additionally, African-inspired architecture and artifacts in ancient American civilizations are cited as potential indicators of early African interaction. What's more, genetic studies have identified genetic markers in indigenous American populations associated with African ancestry. Even various sources, including African oral traditions and writings of early European explorers, suggest contact between African and indigenous American populations. Narratives of African explorers purportedly embarking on transatlantic voyages before Columbus, such as Abu Bakr II of Maldi, are cited. Some researchers point to cultural parallels between African and indigenous American cultures, such as religious beliefs, agricultural practices, and artistic motives, as evidence of contact or influence. Linguistic studies have noted similarities between certain African and indigenous American languages, interpreted by some as evidence of cultural exchange or contact. What do you think? Who are the ancestors of Black Americans? Isn't it true that they have spread various ridiculous theories to make Black Americans doubt their ancestors and genes? In the comments section right below, let us know where you live and what you know about your ancestors. Also, in the comments section right below, let us know which subject you would like us to cover in the next video. The most liked comment.
Okay, we're back. There's another angle on the thing. Okay. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights states the following: every man has a right to a nationality, and every man has a right to change his nationality. Negroes, coloreds, blacks, Afro-Americans, and African Americans are not part of the human family of nations on earth. Black has no standing in law. I mean, we got to do something about that. And until you do, you're going to be stuck like Chuck. You know, you fill out a job application, it tells you on there race, Hispanic, European, African American, Black, Hispanic, and so on and so forth, but nothing about you having a nationality. And in some kind of way, that's got to be a lawsuit. But nevertheless, before we do that, we're going to take a little quick break, and we'll be right back, okay? So y'all hold on a minute, real short.
All right, y'all, so today we're going to be going over ancient black tribes in the Americas. Now, this book is called The Crisis. All right, watch this. It says, even as late as 1775, Francisco Garces was able to come up on a distinct race of black men living side by side with the Zunis of the New Mexico pueblos. He related that the blacks were the first inhabitants of the area, and suffice it to say that the description he gave of them leaves no doubt that they were Negroes. So Francisco Garces said in New Mexico he came up on a tribe of Negroes, and they were the first inhabitants of that area. Do y'all understand this? And because it kills me how these people always claim that we don't have any sources. I gave you the source, Francisco Garces. He's the one who said that. Okay, now watch this. It says, this observation was made about the same time the French explorer Le Perouse was witnessing a similar phenomenon in California. He also found there a race of blacks whom he immediately denoted as Ethiopians. So this is another part. This is, you got a tribe of Negroes, pre-Columbian Negroes in New Mexico, and then you got a tribe of Negroes in California. You understand? Two different groups of people. American Indian legends abound with accounts of black men who came to them from far-off lands. Aside from the report that Columbus obtained at Hispaniola, a notable tale is recorded in the Peruvian traditions. They inform us of how black men coming from the east have been able to penetrate the Andes Mountains. Furthermore, Indian traditions of Mexico and Central America indicate that Negroes were among the first occupants of that territory. That's why I told you guys, if you guys don't know, I'm going to go over a lesson to show you guys where the real name of America comes from. It says, some Indians there yet claim descent from these same blacks. A contemporary anthropologist has convincingly demonstrated that several Indian tribes in this area have developed out of early Negro stocks. Several Indian tribes have developed out of early Negro stocks. So these, they're, again, going over with the Zunis, the same thing. It says, at this juncture, it must be pointed out that the localities of these Negroid Indians correspond to the last detail with the areas where early African settlements were found. Other descendants of pre-Columbian Negroes were either destroyed by the onslaught of the Spanish conquest or eventually absorbed into the slave system. You see that? So right there, you see how they tell on themselves? You see how they tell on themselves. Do y'all understand what I just read? Let me read that bottom part again. It says Negroes. It says other descendants of pre-Columbian Negroes were eventually absorbed into the slave system. What are they telling you right there? That the blacks of America did not come here on slave ships. You see what I'm saying? That's why I wanted to point that part out. They didn't come here on slave ships. Y'all took these indigenous aboriginals that looked like Negroes and y'all enslaved them and changed their race to Negro slave. Just like you see on the slave ads. You see these ads, these are American Indians on these ads, and they changed their race to Negro slave. That's exactly what happened. Y'all took these indigenous people who looked like Negroes, who was already here way before Columbus and anybody else, who are the original people of the land. Y'all took those people, enslaved them, and called them something else. It says an examination of ancient Indian religions yields additional information on the condition of early Africans in the Americas. Several Indian nations, such as the Mayans, Aztecs, and Incas, worshipped black gods along with their other deities, and the Mayan religion particularly exemplifies the high esteem in which the Negroes were held. You see that? So my thing is, if y'all trying to claim that blacks were never here, why is these so-called Native Americans worshiping black gods? Why are they worshiping these black gods? If they never seen these people before, how would they know what they look like in order to worship them? How would they know what they look like in order to create these gods? You see what I'm saying? Like, y'all, this is what people will sit up and they will ignore this information to the end. They will not give us the just due credit of who we are. It says, among the black deities, Quetzalcoatl, the serpent god and messiah, and Echua, the traitor god and war captain, are the most revealing. Their surviving portraits show them black and woolly haired, to have been unmistakably Negro. Do you see that? Their gods, they said their gods were black and woolly haired. They pointed that out. Okay, they made sure these Negroes they talking about. It is important to note here that serpent worship in the same form can still be found today in Mandingo land. So don't say we don't have no proof. Make sure y'all stay tuned. I'm going to do part 2 on this video shortly. Peace.
All right, there you have it. Boom, 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 boom. I've been trying to tell y'all this for a long, long time. But now, let's go back again and find out what we are dealing with to explain how all of this confusion came about.
This is the case with the West. They developed disproportionately in the area of brutality. They place a great deal of importance and value in violence as a kind of virtue. They think that they can claim the moral high ground basically by throwing someone off of a cliff. So this is just a characteristic that they have. They're violent. And this, again, in my opinion, most likely originates in their rather squalid, harsh conditions. Their so-called civilization emerged from harsh conditions. I mean, Europe is cold. The climate is harsh. There's scarce natural resources. Historically, only about a quarter of the terrain in Europe was arable land. So these are people who were struggling to survive. They had to battle for resources. You know, the modern stereotype of Westerners as being soft and pampered and prosperous and so on, this is truly a modern concept because that has not at all been their history. Material resources became intensely important to them. And whatever means expedited the acquisition of resources, by definition, that was good and admirable. And as I've talked about, the Europeans did not have in their various pagan belief systems any guidance that could enable them to cope with the relative deprivation of their societies. We know that they prioritized the successful acquisition of material resources. And this is the highest good for them. So it doesn't matter for them, it doesn't matter to them that this acquisition is achieved by means of savage oppression, if it's achieved by deceit or treachery or theft. If violence or cunning can succeed, then success is all that matters. If violence and cunning succeed, then it also necessarily means in their minds that peacefulness and honesty are impractical virtues. And an impractical virtue is the same thing as a vice in their mind. In other words, if it prevents you from acquiring resources, then it is categorically inferior and wrong. And that will apply to any real civilized values, whether it's peacefulness or honesty or wisdom or restraint or sacrifice or compassion or honor or what have you. None of these virtues deserve respect in their eyes if they hinder you from conquest and pillage. This attitude would be further cemented by the fact that their approach enables you to conquer and pillage genuinely superior cultures and civilizations who adhere to those so-called impractical virtues. If you were truly better than us, in other words, we wouldn't have your stuff. We wouldn't be able to take all your things. We wouldn't be able to take you over. If your civilization was actually superior, then we wouldn't be able to conquer you. That's the thinking. That's the thinking and that's the message. Their message is, your civilization is undeveloped because we were able to conquer you. And because we were able to conquer you, we are superior. But don't worry, we're here to civilize you now. They have an actual disdain for any values, for any morals, for any principles that impede in any way material acquisition. You can translate material acquisition to, in modern parlance, to productivity. So anything that impedes so-called productivity is belittled or outright despised. Even if that is conscience, even if it's upholding trust, even if it's health, even if it's parenthood for that matter. They have to make you think that any other system of prioritization is archaic and obsolete and backwards, that it's incompatible with so-called modernity. And modernity, when they say it, just means sociopathic materialism, which treats moral values and principles as decorative extras that should never interfere with so-called productivity. Their whole so-called civilization developed and has been driven by an obsession with material deprivation, which evolved into a sanctification of anyone who successfully acquired abundant material goods and resources, whoever has amassed wealth. Those people are considered to be the most admired, the most respected, the most important, the most authoritative, the most honorable, the wisest people in society. And thus the whole system of society that they designed is designed to serve those people and to idolize them and glorify them and pay homage to them. From the time of the European warlords to the time of the European feudal lords to now and the lords of business and capital. That's why, for instance, their proof that an economy is healthy and successful is that the economy has produced X number of billionaires. Wealth is the basis of authority. That's how these people think. They want to ensure that everyone thinks that moral values and principles are negotiable and that ultimately they're disposable, because the only thing that ultimately matters is material success at any cost. It's a marauder mentality. If we abandon all of the traits and the characteristics of our civilization that make it superior, then we will become actually inferior, because we will have joined a game in which they already excel, the game of violence and ruthless materialism. It's like if an athlete of one sport agrees to compete with an athlete of another sport in that other athlete's sport. It's like if a golfer or a chess champion agrees to compete in a boxing match with a boxer. It's a rigged competition simply due to the incompatibility of the skill sets. And that's the case with the Muslims and people in the Global South generally, who have more mature, more evolved cultures and civilizations, if they agree to play the barbarian game of the West. This is a case of you accepting that the emperor's clothes are actually the most stylish and most luxurious clothes that you can wear. And so you agree to strip away everything that actually makes you elegant and dignified and protected from the elements, and you want to look like the emperor. And at the end of that game, it won't be that the emperor has no clothes, it will be that the emperor has your clothes, even if they don't fit him. And you'll be left there standing naked, like a fool. At which point the emperor will tell you that you're a naked heathen, and he'll teach you how to dress. That's the game that they want us to play.
Wow. Okay. Let's go on to the next thing. Now, I remember Elijah Muhammad. He was in a conversation. He says the so-called Negro doesn't know who he is. He said the earth, everything on it, and everything in it belongs to him. Now, in an earlier club that I ran tonight, we're everywhere. We're in Asia. We're all over the planet, and we've always been there. Okay? So what I want to look at now is what this guy has to say about the Moors being everywhere.
A critical reading of phylogeographic genetic data supports the hypothesis of populations moving from deep inside Africa up towards the Nile Valley, Northwest Africa, the Levant, and the Greek areas. Today we'll be talking about the wide reach of the ancient black person. Looking at this paper today on the African origins of the Afro-Asiatic language family, which they always tried to say was some sort of Asian thing, which was abandoned long ago. Let's get right into it. Right here, Mr. Arid and Mr. Chiesa start off by writing that Diamond and Bell would suggested that food production and the Afro-Asiatic language family were both brought from the Near East. And we can see right here where they wrote that this idea has been generally abandoned. And this all comes from the school of thought that everything in Africa was created by a non-black person. You see right here that this is an abandoned view, and the authors have misrepresented I am Diakonoff by writing this Eurocentric paper. Notice what it says right here, how they write that Diamond and Bellwood have both failed to engage the 5 decades of Afro-Asiatic scholarship that rebuts the Great White Takeover in the first place. And they do that a lot with African history. They will just simply fail to engage with the massive amounts of evidence that their colleagues have put before them. But that's a story for another day. What we do know is that there's well-grounded linguistic research that places the Afro-Asiatic homeland either in the southeast Sahara or somewhere around the Horn of Africa. Diakonoff's work was influential, and we see that he continued to adhere to a long-held position of an exclusively African origin. And Diakonoff had revised the common Semitic homeland to be straddling the Delta and Sinai. And we see these African links to pre-Neolithic cultures in not only the Levant, but in Africa south of Egypt. And the evidence south of Egypt is older than the evidence in the Levant. And if we look down at the bottom of the page, we see how they're talking about movements from Africa into the Levant. And this is consistent with linguistic arguments for a pre-Neolithic migration of early people out of Africa into the Sinai. This is important because all we ever hear are stories about back to Africa migrations 500 million years ago. We always have arrows being drawn towards us, but there's never any arrows drawn where we're going somewhere. And this is all a part of the Great White Takeover, of Northeast Africa. But there was no takeover. The reality of what happened is the ancient ancestors left from the Afroasiatic homeland and went up into all these areas that we associate with ancient history. And we're going to be getting deeper into that. Let's do it. Here we have a map, another major area in African history. The Afroasiatic homeland evidence is the strongest in these areas. When we look at the genetic analysis, specifically of the Y chromosome, the genetic data supports a hypothesis that people left from the Horn of Africa or southeastern Sahara and went north to the Nile Valley, up to Morocco, the Levant, up into the Greek areas. And this is supported by not only genetic evidence, archaeological and anthropological evidence. So when we go back to this quote right here, we now have a little bit of background now when we see that the great explorer Livingstone said that the Negro face as he saw it reminded him more of that on the monuments of ancient Assyria than of the popular white fantasy. And we can see why Petrie believed that the second dynasty of the Egyptians was overthrown by Ethiopians, and the great art of the 4th and 5th dynasties arose out of that. Because like I said before, these people have all these stuff that we're talking about today, they've always known these things. This is why they spend so much time creating fantasy stories. When we get back to the Afroasiatic language family, we see that the archaeology of North Africa does not support early Neolithic demic intrusion from Asia. That says clearly, once again, that there was no takeover of North Africa in ancient times, which is something that they always want you to imagine in your mind. And what I have highlighted in green right here goes hand in hand with what I talked about on my last series on the origins of the pre-dynastic. Indications of early African farmers in the Fayum initially incorporating Near Eastern domesticates into an indigenous foraging strategy. And we also see that this is inconsistent with their fantasy takeover. That in itself goes hand in hand with what Maria Gatto wrote here when she said that most of the activities connected with the Neolithic package in other areas of the world were already present in Nubia, and this includes the domestication of animals. So that when the domesticated sheep and goats started coming in from the Levant around 6000 BC, they had already had experience in doing that. And then right here at the bottom of the page, furthermore, there's evidence that cattle domestication independently occurred in the Holocene in the Eastern Sahara, blah, blah, blah. So we come back to the Afroasiatic study where the evidence indicates that the early African farmers up there initially incorporated Near Eastern domesticates into an indigenous strategy. You see how the evidence on this channel goes hand in hand. So we come back to this Afroasiatic story. The same archaeological pattern occurs west of Egypt, where domestic animals and grains were gradually adopted after 8,000 to 7,000 years before present into the established pre-agricultural Caspian culture that was present across North Africa, Northern Sahara, since 10,000 years ago. And all of this is important when they come to you with this fantasy sort of vision of some sort of non-black thing coming in and showing everybody what to do. As we see at the bottom of the page, of course, doubt should be cast on the idea of a unidirectional spread of food production from Asia. Because with these people, everything is from Asia, you know, when that's just nothing more than them being thieves. Western Europeans trying to be thieves. And also with this early Afroasiatic proto-language, we have supporting views that herding and cultivation emerged separately in each branch, distinctly after the proto-language period. So this tells us basically that the languages were diversifying into the different ones. As for this paper, they do a very good job at completely shutting down Diamond and Bellwood and go by point with many facts that the original homeland of the Afroasiatic family is inside Africa. The language of the Arabs and everyone else, it all comes from these original African people who are right here on this map that you see on your screen. So when we move forward and read about this data in the genetic analysis about the Y chromosome phylogeography, we see that that supports the hypothesis of people leaving from those areas up into all of the ancient world, where we have Babylon, we have Assyria, we have everything. Troy, Rome, Greece, and more importantly, the Natufian people. There was most definitely some sort of African component with these people. And what's important about the Natufians is they were a part of the whole revolution of agriculture. And they say that it's agriculture which is what led to civilization. And these Near Eastern farmers then went into Europe and taught the Europeans how to farm, thus bringing civilization to these people. And when it comes to Europe, especially the Northern Europeans, many of them took thousands of years to even get around to agriculture in the first place. Let's not forget what they're talking about when West African R1 DNA comes up. It's always Tyler left from Eurasia and went to Cameroon, when it very well could have been the other way around. Someone's ancient African ancestor could have easily been chilling somewhere in Eurasia and then did a back migration to Africa. Let's not forget that everyone in the world has a back to Africa migration except for the indigenous people that are already there. Here we have a map of haplogroup E, which is an African bloodline, and all of the areas in which they're talking about here, in which we all talk about, these are all of the areas that are colored in on the map, which shows the areas that we've been to. Now when you look at a Neolithic European map, these sort of maps are typical where they have arrows going in every single direction possible. Never mind the fact that they were hardly in Europe at that time. So I decided to make my own map. And what I did was I drew some arrows on the map. And I'm here to tell you today that every single arrow that I drew on this map is backed up by data. Movements up and down the Sahara, across the Sahara, up and down the Nile. We have dispersions leaving up out of the Ethiopian areas. And we also cannot forget about the Nilotic migrations down as far as Mozambique. And early in history, the Khoisan went all the way up to Ethiopia and have even made it clear up to Morocco. And so, again, we never get these sorts of maps for ourselves. We always get maps with one direction where Europeans come in there, or we're walking somewhere on a Bantu migration. But all of that is a fantasy created to keep you in Negro land. And you see the main areas, there are three jewels that they created for themselves, which is the Middle East, the Greek world, and Spain. And we were in those areas long before they were there. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that we've been to all these areas. When we look at this map right here, we can see that all of these things matches up with exactly where we've been. There became a juxtaposition. This is why we have certain artifacts like this, where you have the so-called black person sitting up next to the so-called non-black person. And this went on a lot in ancient history. Here we have a Phoenician example. And even when you want to take a look at things from a biblical perspective, all of these kingdoms that you see right here, that's the sons of Ham. The Akkadians, Babylon, all of that, son of Ham. Canaan, son of Ham. And so when we take a look at the table of nations in the Bible, it actually matches up, when you think about it, to not only the genetic evidence, the archaeological evidence, and everything else. Which is an interesting thing to note. And again, it gives us a little bit of background as to why Livingston said that the Negro face reminded him of an ancient Assyrian. To this day, I wonder what the hell was he looking at. Of course, you know, they destroy stuff, throw it away, you know what I'm saying, create fake evidence. But we were most definitely in ancient Assyria, most definitely in ancient Persia, most definitely in Babylon, Sumerian, all of that. You know, living alongside of whoever else was there. You know, they said those places were the sons of Ham for a reason. When we think about the spread of this language group, the Afro-Asiatics, and we think about the genetic data that has us go into all of the ancient areas of the known world that these people worship, we were there every single time. And one thing that we can say for sure is that a Germanic person was most definitely irrelevant at these times. You know what I'm saying? And you know, that's the part that really makes them mad, is the whole Western European aspect and them being missing. You know, but that's not our fault. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time.
All right, we back. We had it everywhere. I'm waiting on them to say something about Japan, China. I have the actual photographs, but I guess the brother covered as much ground as he could possibly cover. We're going to take another little quick break, and then we'll be right back. Y'all hold on a minute.
All right, everybody. don't forget, the greatest focal point in your life is when preparedness and opportunity meet. Hello, I'm Tarhaka Amana El Bay. I want to give a shout out to all the brothers and sisters across the country that got our secure party and credit information. It was now officially operating in the private. Keep in mind, you can access the direct treasury account, private banking, knowing the difference between public and private and being able to function correctly. Do that OID. Learn about your 1099s. You can do a whole lot of stuff once you have the knowledge to do so. Go to TarhakaDebtElimination.org. That's TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Fill out the Contact Us form. Send it to me and I'll send you my free report. TarhakaDebtElimination.org.
Who are the ancestors of African Americans? Well, most African Americans believe that the majority of their DNA has roots in Africa, while the remaining has roots in Native American tribes and Europe. This is often backed by genetic studies that reveal that African Americans have 73.2% African DNA, 24% European DNA, and 0.8% Native American DNA. This makes everyone believe that they are majorly descendants of black slaves. But what if we tell you that it's wrong? You have been intentionally told so. In fact, studies reveal that about 98% of African Americans have Native American roots. So, why were you lied to and what do they want to hide? Let's find that out in this video.
The Black History Archives.
You would have never heard that tens of millions of native black Americans, or rather Indians, used to live before Christopher Columbus came to America. However, immediately after 1492, all of them disappeared. But where did they all go? Well, many were shipped to Europe and Africa as Indian slaves. That's when we realized that the story we have been taught about the slave trade is actually backward. Instead of a massive influx of Africans to America, black Indians were transported from America to Europe. From there, they were sent from Spain to Africa as commodities in exchange for African resources. These black Indians, now mistakenly identified as African Americans, were later shipped back to America and labeled as African slaves. This crucial part of our history is often neglected in school curriculums. Every European nation that colonized North America exploited Indian slaves for construction, plantations, and mining. These slaves were frequently sent to outposts in the Caribbean and Europe. Historical records, particularly those from South Carolina, the original English colony of Carolina established in 1670, provide the most authentic documentation of this practice. Between 1650 and 1730, it's estimated that at least 50,000 Indians, possibly more, were exported by the English to their Caribbean outposts. Many shipments were concealed to avoid paying government tariffs and taxes. Between 1670 and 1717, more Indians were exported than Africans were imported. Entire tribes in the southern coastal regions were decimated by slavery more than by disease or war. A law passed in 1704 conscripted Indian slaves to fight in colonial wars long before the American Revolution. Indians found themselves caught in the colonial powers' strategies for economic control. The fur trade in the Northeast, the English plantation system in the South, and the Spanish mission system in Florida all caused major disruptions to Indian communities. Displaced Indians from the fur trade in the North migrated south. Plantation owners armed them to hunt slaves living in Spanish mission communities. The French, English, and Spanish manipulated the slave trade to their advantage. They negotiated the freedom of slaves in exchange for peace, friendship, and military alliances. For instance, the British established ties with the Chickasaw in Georgia, who were surrounded by enemies. The Chickasaw conducted extensive slave raids in the lower Mississippi Valley, selling the slaves to the English to reduce Indian populations and prevent the French from arming them. Ironically, The English saw this as a more effective method of so-called civilizing them compared to the French missionaries' efforts. The Indian slave trade stretched from New Mexico, which was then Spanish territory, all the way north to the Great Lakes. Historians believe that every tribe in this vast region was involved in the slave trade, either as captives or traders. Slavery was a key part of the strategy to depopulate the land and make room for European settlers. Here's a reminder to please support us so we can make more videos for you by subscribing to our channel and giving the video a like. We want to build a strong community, and we need your support. Let's continue now. As early as 1636, after the Pequot War, in which 300 Pequots were massacred, the surviving Pequots were sold into slavery and sent to Bermuda. Major slaving ports included Boston, Salem, Mobile, and New Orleans. From these ports, Indians were shipped to Barbados by the English, to Martinique and Guadeloupe by the French, and to the Antilles by the Dutch. Indian slaves were also sent to the Bahamas, often called breaking grounds, from where they might be transported back to New York or Antigua. Historical records show that Indians were seen as poor slaves. When not shipped far from their home territories, they easily escaped and found refuge with other Indian communities. They also died in high numbers during transatlantic journeys and succumbed to European diseases. By 1676, Barbados had banned Indian slavery, citing their too bloody and dangerous an inclination to remain here. But how does it prove that most black people in America are descendants of native black Indian people? Well, as the Indian slave trade was replaced by the African slave trade by the late 1700s, Native American women began to intermarry with imported Africans. This produced mixed-race offspring whose native identities became obscured over time. The colonial project aimed to erase the presence of Indians, and these mixed-race individuals were labeled as colored people through bureaucratic changes in public records. In places like Virginia, even when individuals were recorded as Indians on birth or death certificates or other public records, these records were often changed to colored. Census takers, determining a person's race by their appearance, frequently recorded mixed-race individuals as simply black, not Indian. As a result, today there is a population of Native American heritage, particularly in the Northeast, who are not recognized by society at large. What's more, this suggests that native black Indians and black Americans of today are the same. They share similar circumstances with the freedmen of the Cherokee and other 5 civilized tribes, as documented on the Dawes Roll cards by the United States Dawes Roll Administration. Interestingly, in early September 2015, Native American Indian tribes were awarded nearly $1 billion in a historic settlement. A total of 645 Native American tribes won settlements against the U.S. Department of Justice, amounting to $940 million. The U.S. government was fearful that more Native Indians, also known as colored, Negro, black, or simply left blank on their birth certificates, would discover their true history and heritage. This discovery could potentially force the government to grant them reparations and land. To avoid this, the U.S. quietly declared a deadline of December 31st, 2014, for these individuals to make land claims and identity claims. Even though the deadline has passed, thousands of Native Indians are still winning settlements through the U.S. Supreme Court and, more commonly, through the United Nations courts. But the question is, where did those black Indian Americans come from? Until now, it's established that most black people in America today have native black American ancestors. But we have to know who these native black Americans are. Dr. David Imhotep, a renowned historian and the first person to earn a Ph.D. in ancient African ancestry, offers a groundbreaking perspective on human origins. He argues that all humans, including Americans, trace their roots back to Africa. This view challenges the traditional narratives in American history books, which often start with cowboys and Indians. According to Dr. Imhotep, These accounts miss a much earlier and crucial chapter of American history, the presence and influence of Africans in ancient America. In his influential book, They Came Before Columbus, historian Ivan van Sertima explores various forms of evidence supporting the idea of an African presence in the New World long before Christopher Columbus's arrival. Van Sertima examines critical aspects to build his case. He looks into the sophisticated navigation and shipbuilding techniques that ancient Africans had, which could have enabled transatlantic voyages. He also draws cultural parallels between Native Americans and Africans, highlighting similarities in art, language, and religious practices that suggest historical connections. Van Sertima further investigates the transportation of plants, animals, and textiles between the continents, arguing that these exchanges indicate contact between Africa and the Americas. Additionally, he cites diaries, journals, and oral accounts of explorers referencing African peoples and their influence in the New World. Together, these elements create a compelling picture of African exploration and settlement in the Americas well before Columbus's famous voyage in 1492. Several historical accounts support Van Sertima's thesis. One notable example is the fleet launched by the Malian Empire in 1310, comprising 200 master boats and 200 supply boats. This grand expedition highlights the advanced seafaring capabilities of West African civilizations. Another example is the sea expedition led by the Mandingo King in 1311, further demonstrating the intentional exploration efforts by African leaders. The presence and impact of black Africans in pre-Columbian America are evident in the cultural and technological imprints they left on the civilizations they encountered. In his book, The First Americans Were Africans, Dr. Imhotep expands on these themes, calling for a radical reevaluation of traditional history. He emphasizes the importance of scientific and geological evidence in tracing the early presence of African peoples in the Americas. This evidence includes genetic studies, ancient artifacts, and geological findings suggesting that Africans were present in both North and South America long before the Vikings or Columbus. One striking piece of evidence highlighted by Dr. Imhotep is a photograph from the HMS Challenger expedition, which took place between 1872 and 1876. This photograph, currently displayed at the Natural Museum of London, shows a colorful display of African explorers in Tierra del Fuego, the southernmost region of South America. This image serves as a tangible reminder of the historical presence of Africans in the Americas, further supporting Dr. Imhotep's arguments. Ultimately, this suggests that the identity of black people is too diverse to fit into a single label. They are Afro-Indigenous, Black Native, Indigenous and Black, Black and Native, or Black and a tribal identity. By honoring both their heritages, black people challenge America's tradition of categorizing people into distinct racial groups. They resist societal pressure to choose between their identities based on appearance or perceived authenticity. Many blend their black and native identities by using traditional language or developing new expressions that reflect their unique heritage. Since the first contact between Africans and native peoples, black and indigenous ancestors have built communities, formed relationships, and fought against systems of oppression unique to their communities as well as those that overlap. Despite the hardships faced, black and native peoples have never been conquered. They have found ways to resist oppression, creating modes of defiance such as abolition, free towns, cross-cultural alliances, kinship ties, and community building. They have pushed for freedom individually and in solidarity, birthing enduring movements of resistance. What do you think? Are black Americans descendants of black African slaves or native Indian American black people? What, in your opinion, is the reason why they hide black Americans' real ancestry? In the comments section right below, tell us whether you have had your DNA tested and know the percentage of native black Indian DNA you hold. Would you like us to make more videos? If yes, please...
Okay. we're going down to the last 36 minutes. Let's take a look at a biggie. The roots of race. Let's take a look at that, and we're gonna ride on out on that right there. Y'all hold on a minute. Run this commercial. I'll be right back.
Once again, don't wait until it's too late. Hi, I'm Tarhaka. Get out of debt now. Use what you already have at your disposal. Try living in the private for the first time in your life. Go to TarhakaDebtElimination.org. What are you going to do when the economy collapses? What are you going to do when life in the public becomes so unbearable you don't think you can survive? There is something you can do now. Gain the benefit now of using the private banking and credit available to you. Avoid the loss of your hard-earned cash, which are debt notes. Go to TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Request my free report by filling out the Contact Us form, and I will rush the report to your email box. Act now. We still have a small amount of time. TarhakaDebtElimination.org.
Let me tell you a story. Let's begin our conversation today in the age of enlightenment. The age of enlightenment. You know, those who have chronicled human history on this planet, historians and academics and scholars and scribes, have classified human history into different periods. We know that. Different ages, if you will. And so we have what is called the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, the Stone Age and the Dark Age and the Middle Ages. We have what is characterized, that's a key word, as prehistory and ancient history, post-classical history, modern history, and contemporary history. So I want us to focus now in on the early modern period of human history. And this is roughly, loosely considered to be the years between 15 and 1800. Those 300 or so years. And focusing even further, I want to pitch a tent and camp out for a bit in what is called the Age of Enlightenment, which is, I would say, roughly the 100 years between 17 and 1800. Some call this 100 or so years the Age of Reason, and it is widely regarded as the century of philosophy. And so, brothers and sisters, let us travel back to the world of ideas in 18th century Europe. Specifically in France, this period was characterized by the phrase, dare to know. And many of the leading thinkers and philosophers and researchers and writers and my favorites, the Freemasons of that time, often circulated their ideas and their thoughts through meetings at sort of scientific academies and at Masonic lodges and what they called literary salons and coffee houses, and through, of course, printed books and pamphlets. And what is key and significant about this emerging world of ideas, these developing thoughts and philosophies, is that they often undermined the authority of the ruling monarchy at that time. And in many cases, many times, this world of ideas was often at odds with and totally contrary to the established teachings of the Catholic Church. So many of those leading thinkers and philosophers that I was telling you about, and the researchers and the writers and the Freemasons at that time, the ones that were circulating those ideas in those meetings at the scientific academies and at the Masonic lodges and the literary salons and coffee houses, a lot of them had backgrounds in science and mathematics and physics and astronomy and biology and chemistry. So among them, there emerged this hunger, this thirst for recovering some of the lost knowledge of the ancients. And thus we got some of the new discoveries of that era by Copernicus and Galileo and Isaac Newton. And it was also around this time that some of those researchers began to advance scientific ideas and theories under headings, these were new headings at that time, of natural philosophy and natural history, looking more closely at the origins of man's chemical and biological and geological and
anatomical nature. So these men began to examine the nature of mankind. And that now brings us, brothers and sisters, to Sweden and to one of its native-born sons, botanist, physician, and zoologist, Mr. Carl Linnaeus. First, he formalized the modern system of naming organisms using both their genus and species names. And that system we know today as binomial nomenclature. Binomial, bi meaning two, and nomial meaning name. So two names to characterize and classify plants and animals. So what does that look like? That's how we got Homo sapiens. Two names, one genus, one species. That's how we got Homo erectus. Two names to categorize and classify. These are examples of binomial nomenclature. So that's one thing. The second thing Brother Carl Linnaeus is known for, in 1735, he published the book Systema Naturae, Systema Naturae, or the System of Nature. And in that book, Carl Linnaeus classified thousands of species of animals and plants. And what he also did was he described human beings just as he described any other plant or animal. And he did this by examining several monkeys and noting the similarities between the monkeys and man. And Carl Linnaeus pointed out that both species basically have the same anatomy, except for speech. He found no other differences between monkeys and man. So in his book, Systema Naturae, he placed man and monkeys under the same category. And he called this category anthropomorpha. Anthropomorpha, meaning man-like, man-like. And eventually, in later editions of Systema Naturae, we, mankind, were classified as primates instead of anthropomorpha. And humans were given the full binomial of Homo sapiens. So that's how we got there. Now here's where it gets really interesting, brothers and sisters. In the first edition of Systema Naturae, and that would be the 1735 publishing of the book, Carl Linnaeus subdivided the human species into 4 varieties based on continent and skin color. Now this is 1735. Carl Linnaeus, of Swedish birth, a European man, subdivided the human species into 4 varieties. Number 1, Europaeus albus. Europaeus albus, also known as white European. Number 2, Americanus rubescens. Americanus rubescens, also known as the red American. Americanus rubescens, the red American. Number 3, Asiaticus fuscus. Asiaticus fuscus, also known as the brown Asian, which was subsequently changed in the 10th edition of the book, which was published in 1758. Asiaticus fuscus was changed to Asiaticus viridis, also known as the yellow Asian. So that's how we got there. And number 4, Africanus niger. Africanus niger, also known as the black African. Africanus niger. Now we know today that Niger is a country in West Africa. Some people say Niger. And the history of that country dates way back into what is known as prehistory. So the first publication of Systema Naturae by Carl Linnaeus was in 1735, as I've said, and in the 10th edition of the book, which again was published in 1758, Carl Linnaeus went even further by detailing stereotypical characteristics for each of those 4 varieties of the species of man. All of those characteristics based on the concept of the 4 temperaments from classical Greco-Roman antiquity. Loosely they are sanguine, which means enthusiastic, active, and social. Number 2 of the 4 temperaments, choleric, which means short-tempered, fast, or irritable. Number 3, melancholic, which means analytical, wise, and quiet. And the 4th of the 4 temperaments, phlegmatic, which means relaxed and peaceful. And so here's how he added those 4 varieties of the species of man. This is the descriptions that he added next to those 4 categorizations that he had done earlier in a previous edition of the book. Next to the Americanus, he wrote red, choleric, righteous, black, straight, thick hair, stubborn, zealous, free, painting himself with red lines, and regulated by customs. That's what he wrote next to Americanus. Next to Europeanus, he wrote white, sanguine, with abundant long hair, blue eyes, gentle, acute, inventive, covered with close vestments and regulated by customs. And next to the Asiaticus, he wrote yellow, melancholic, stiff, black hair, dark eyes, severe, haughty, greedy, covered with loose clothing, and regulated by opinions. And next to the Africanus, he wrote black, phlegmatic, relaxed, black frizzled hair, silky skin, flat nose, tumid lips, that means swollen, females without shame, mammary glands give milk abundantly, crafty, sly, careless, anoints himself with grease, and regulated by will. Now these are the characteristics of the black man and black woman as listed in the year 1758 by Carl Linnaeus in his book Systema Naturae. And this, brothers and sisters, is one of the deep roots of race and racism as we know it today. Let me tell you a story. Let's begin today in the year 1775 in the country of Germany at the University of Göttingen, or Göttingen, Gottingen, University of Göttingen. A young man studying medicine there in 1775 publishes his thesis called On the Natural Variety of Mankind. On the Natural Variety of Mankind. And in his thesis, this young man explored the classification of human races based upon craniological research. Craniological being, just what you think, being the study of the hard casing enclosing the human brain, that being the human skull. So in his 1775 medical doctoral thesis, this young man began to look at the size and shape of the human skull, and he began to draw some conclusions. And I want to underscore here right off the break that this gentleman was not studying the brain itself. He was studying the hard material encasing and closing the brain. He was studying the size and shape of the human skull. That is an important fact and distinction to keep in your mind and in your consciousness as we delve deeper into this conversation. So again, that was in 1775. And in 1779, some 4 years later, this same young man, based upon his continued cranial research, he divided the human species into 5 races based upon his examination of skulls. 5 human races. And he broke down those races as follows. Number 1, the Caucasian or white race. Number 2, the Mongolian or yellow race, including all East Asians and some Central Asians. Number 3, the Malayan or brown race, including Southeast Asian and Pacific Islander. Number 4, the Ethiopian or black race, including sub-Saharan Africans. Number 5, the American or red race, including American Indians. And again, all of this was based upon this young man's craniological research, all right? His study of the human skull. And his name was Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, a German national, a man of European descent, a physician, physiologist, and anthropologist. In 1779, Blumenbach divided the human species into 5 races, all based upon his research and observations of about 60 human skulls. So let that sink in a bit, brothers and sisters. Now, at that point in the development of thought, in the world of ideas in European society, in that period that is called, as we discussed last time, the Age of Enlightenment or the Age of Reason, there had emerged at that time 2 predominant philosophies as to the origins of humankind. First, there were those who took the biblical view. No surprise there. Those that believed that human beings are one species and that race represents variations in and variations of that one human species. That's the Bible view. And that belief was known as monogenism or monogenism. Mono being one, and genesis meaning origin, so one origin. And so these folks were known as monogenists, believing in one human species with lots of variation within that one species. And then you had the second group of people. And those folks believed that human beings evolved from several independent pairs of ancestors. And this was known as polygenism. Poly being many and genesis being origin. So many origins. And these folks were known as polygynists or polygenists, meaning they believed that human beings evolved from multiple species And this group would later be known as, maybe you've heard this term, pluralists. Now, Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, who studied the human skulls and based upon that research divided mankind into 5 races, Blumenbach subscribed to monogenism or monogenism, and he was considered a monogynist. And he argued in his work that listen to this, brothers and sisters, he argued in his work that human physical characteristics like skin color and cranial profile depended on geography and diet and mannerism. So Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, he held to what is called the degenerative hypothesis of racial origins. Well, what is the degenerative hypothesis? Blumenbach believed that Adam and Eve were Caucasians dwelling in Asia, and that other races, quote-unquote, degenerated from this original white stock as a result of environmental factors like geography and the cold of the wind in Europe and the heat of the sun in sub-Saharan Africa and the varying quality of available food sources, let's say in North, Central, and South Americas. All these factors would help and contribute to the degeneration of the races from this original Caucasian white stock. Now get this. Blumenbach also believed that this whole, this makes me laugh, this whole degenerative process could be reversed. That in the right environment and under the right circumstances and with the proper diet, that all forms of man, all the quote-unquote degenerated races like Negroes and Eskimos and the Chinese and American Indians, they could all be reverted back to the original Caucasian race. And I will remind you here, brothers and sisters, at this point, that Johann Friedrich Blumenbach was a respected scientist of his day. So this work brought forward by Johann Friedrich Blumenbach is another deep root of racism. And that is not to say, I want to be very clear about this, that is not to say that Brother Blumenbach himself was racist or that his ideas were or are inherently racist. The point I want to make here is that the introduction of these ideas and philosophies into polite society during the time of the scientific revolution leading into the Age of Enlightenment in the early modern period of human history. These ideas, in the name of science, racist or not, allowed for those who were overtly racist, those ideas allowed racists to co-opt those scientific findings by Blumenbach and to use those ideas in the name of science to further an overtly racist political, social, and scientific agenda at that time, and to impose and inflict those racist ideas onto the larger society in which they live. It is the co-opting of ideas in the name of science to perpetuate a racist political agenda. That's the larger point that I would like to make here. So for the past few conversations, we have been talking about the deep roots of racism, and the work of Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, brothers and sisters, is yet another deep root of racism in our contemporary society. The last time we were together, we pulled up another deep root of racism in discussing the work of Mr. Carl Linnaeus, who was the first of the Age of Enlightenment philosophers to describe human beings just as he described any other plant or animal. And as we discussed last time, he did that by examining several monkeys and noting the similarities between the monkeys and man. And Carl Linnaeus pointed out that both species basically have the same anatomy except for speech, and he found no other differences between monkeys and man. And Carl Linnaeus went on to, as we discussed, subdivide the human species into 4 varieties. Now, he did his work based on continent, so where these people were located, and skin color. And he later further detailed what he saw as the stereotypical characteristics for each of those 4 varieties of the species of man. And Carl Linnaeus did all of that. He did his work around the time of 1758. He is the first deep root of racism that we have discussed and dug up. And today we add the work of Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, who, as we have stated, divided humankind into 4 races based upon his craniological research, the study of human skulls. And Blumenbach did.
Okay, we have it. Now you know where this stuff coming from. You got a caller with his hand raised at area code 909. Area code 909, you on there. Tell us who you are, where you calling from, what's your questions.
How are you?
I'm just fine. Who am I speaking to?
Hang on with me. I can hear you now. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Who am I speaking to?
I am Clay Douglas.
What can I do for you?
I'm a writer, I'm a publisher. I put out the Free American Magazine. I put out Writers Exchange Magazine.
Okay. What do you think about
I'm a little touchy on here because it's a serious matter. Attempted genocide on the white race. Who's your boss? Is it the Mossad or the ADL?
I'm afraid you done lost me with that. I'm gonna have to mute your mic. We're down to the last 15 minutes. We're going on and move on through the broadcast. And we don't want to cut off any minds. We don't want to do distortion. And but you had roots and race, so we're gonna get on down here and let's hear what Mr. Boland has to say again about this thing.
The pagan history of Europe means that the entire development, their entire development as nations, as societies, as a so-called civilization, was guided by waswasa, by the whispering of shaitan. And as we know, when they did adopt Christianity, they remained pagan, with only a flimsy veneer of Tawheed on top of that. It was a rebranding, if you will, a rebranding of paganism. So the waswasa in Europe, in the West, wasn't stopped by the church. They just modified it. They just modified the messaging, just like when a company rebrands and they change their marketing strategy. The way that their whole so-called civilization developed has made violence and pillage and inevitability. They've never known how to assign value properly. And they built their whole society and their whole character on this confusion. This is why until today, they still believe that wealth constitutes worth, violence constitutes strength, conquest constitutes superiority. They had this Iblis-led superficiality in their understanding of the world then, and they have it now. There's no way to divorce Western so-called civilization and colonization from their origins, their roots, and their whole development in kufr. Western colonialism, colonization, imperialism, and so on. These are all manifestations and expressions of the kufr of their so-called civilization, originating from their wrong assignment of value because of kufr, lack of appreciation because of kufr, dissatisfaction because of kufr, their inflated sense of their own importance because of kufr, and their violent supremacism because of kufr. We have to recognize and we have to understand that Western colonization is an imposition of confusion and misguidance, a confusion and misguidance that could not be inflicted upon the Muslims except by savage violence and oppression and by force. And they want us to be as confused and misguided as they are. They want us to assign value according to that same shaitanic formula. I mean, every ayah that you read in the Quran about the way the kuffar think, the way they feel, the way they view the world, the way they view life, you have to understand that this is what they call civilization, what they call advanced and evolved, what they say is superior and enlightened, literally kufr. Literally every blameworthy attitude and perspective that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains to us that the kuffar have. The attitudes and the perspectives that have made them lost, made them neurotic and violent and depressed and miserable, they want us to follow suit. They want all of that for us. So don't have it anywhere in your mind that the West is superior, that it's better, or that it's more advanced. The ayah in Hujurat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us what the proper criteria of value is, which is taqwa, which is piety, it's righteousness. And then he's telling us the value irrelevance of race, tribe, gender, nationality, and so on. And in Surah Ar-Rum, the irrelevance in terms of value of color and language. And in Al-Ma'idah, the value irrelevance of class, of family, and even of self. And each of these ayat provide further clarification of what is actually the criteria of value: piety, knowledge, justice, and truthfulness, righteousness. These are the qualities of superiority. These are the qualities of value and honor and importance. And they have nothing whatsoever to do with material status, with external appearance, with race, with ethnicity, strength, power, wealth, so on and on and on. They have to do with belief, with understanding, with character, with integrity, and the prioritization of these qualities above and beyond even family, even tribe, even racial or nationalistic interests. These are truly civilized values. because anyone can be righteous, regardless of his or her wealth, regardless of his or her race or color or nation. None of those incidental characteristics denote superiority or value. And as incidental, value-irrelevant characteristics, they cannot be the basis of conflict. They can't be the basis of rivalry or resentment or war or conquest. They can't be the basis of tyranny and oppression. They can't be the basis of privilege or the denial of privilege. They can't be the basis of any sort of sense of supremacy or entitlement. And our civilization developed around these concepts. We didn't pretend to adopt these concepts, these values, by just, slapping them on our cultural advertising like stickers. Our culture grew from these concepts. And Western civilization, so-called civilization, is built around the absence of these ayats. So just contemplate what sort of ugliness that would create. Racism, classism, misogyny, brutality, nepotism, favoritism, prejudice, xenophobia, exploitation, on. And of course, colonization and violent conquest, subjugation, etc., etc. Everything that we know and associate with the West. What I'm telling you is that the West, the collective West, Europe and America, represent centuries upon centuries of misguidance, kufr, and following waswasa. These people are multi-generational victims of shaitan. And one of the most insidious aspects of their supremacist mentality is that it seals them off from guidance. It makes them think that waswasa is the voice of enlightened reason. And because they are the most influenced by waswasa, they think that they have a monopoly on reason and rationality, while they are, century after century, the most confused, misled, uncivilized, unevolved, backwards people on the planet. But Shaitan has inoculated them against self-awareness, against ever seeing themselves for how they really are. And part of how he did that was precisely by making them believe that they're superior and everyone else is inferior. It's like a cult that can only be sustained by making sure that all of their members never talk to people outside of the cult. So they eventually become intellectual inbreds, only ever listening to their own version of reality. Their thoughts and perceptions are forever kept within their own ideological gene pool. So just like with actual inbreeding, they become mutants, deformed. Defects develop intellectually, ideologically, morally, and in terms of character. That's what happens when you base superiority on anything other than piety and righteousness. You start to give honor and importance to impious, wicked people, just because they meet your criteria of value-irrelevant characteristics. And then that elevation and that honor gives validity and respectability to impiety and to wickedness. And from there, the mutations and the deformations just keep continuing on, generation after generation, and that's the West. That's what the West has done to their own people, which is why their people have done so much harm to the world. There are tragic people whose hands have wrought tragedies all around the globe. They aren't saviors. They need to be saved themselves. And you're doing yourselves and you're doing them a gross disservice by thinking otherwise about them, or by allowing them to think otherwise about themselves for even a second.
All right, there you have it. This information that I'm putting out tonight seems to be disturbing quite a few people. I had one guy dial in, I think he was drunk, and another guy in the chat room, Stone Fox, I guess he was, and what you call him, an Indian. He says, your volume is real effing low. Raise it, I don't even do a show. Wow, this is amazing, man. All right, we're going to take a little quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be closing on out the broadcast. Y'all hold on a minute. okay, I want to see if I can get in one more plug. I know I won't be able to do it all. Let's just determine whether or not the Olmac people were black. Oh, Lord, man.
Today, we're going to be looking at one of the oldest, if not the oldest, civilizations in America, the Olmecs. Yes, the Olmecs, a black civilization here in the Americas. The role of the Olmec in Mesoamerica society is a matter of hot debate between archaeologists and anthropologists. The Olmec colossal heads are the most famous artifacts left behind by the Olmec civilization. The Olmec people are believed to have occupied a large part of modern-day southern Mexico. The Olmec civilization is what is known as an archaeological culture. This means that there is a collection of artifacts thought by archaeologists to represent a particular society. What is known about archaeological cultures is based on artifacts rather than texts. So the reality of the situation is that they really don't know. It's all speculation. There are several Olmec sites thought to be important centers for activity. The Olmec created massive monuments including colossal stone heads, thrones, upright slabs, and statues. They are most likely the originators of the Mesoamerican ball game, a ceremonial team sport played throughout the region for centuries. They also built earthen mounds and pyramids and ceramics of several types that became common throughout a broad region influenced by the Olmec civilizations. Did you catch that? They created mounds and pyramids. Now you tell me, what people group throughout this planet, throughout this world, have created and built pyramids? And no, it wasn't aliens. And just for the record, the builders of the pyramids throughout this planet were all black people. The Olmec civilization is one of the most influential ancient civilizations of the early Americas. It is commonly thought to be the mother culture of many other cultures that appeared in the region years later. However, many historians trace all these cultures back to their shared Olmec heritage. So in essence, the Olmec civilization is the first civilization in the Americas. Now when studying the stone heads from the Olmecs, one of the things that is rarely seen is the back of the heads. Now the back of the heads reveal braided, plaited hair. Now I ask you folks, what group of people braids their hair? What group of men braid and plait their hair even till today? It is obvious it's us. Our people do that. That is part of our culture, and it has been for thousands of years. Other cultures of men do not braid their hair to the extent that our people do. Yes, black people throughout the diaspora braid their hair. And I don't care what anybody else say, we know that to be true. So those heads, that is further proof who those people were. Yes, those people who built those stone heads were without a doubt black people. And of course, we know that our beautiful, amazing sisters have hundreds of different styles of hair braiding. That is a black thing.
According to an archaeologist. Okay, well that'll do it for us this evening. And I hope I did something for you on part one. And stay tuned for part two. Don't forget, we're going to convert this over to a video. And y'all go ahead and subscribe to the channel and be looking out for part two, because I'll be bringing that. I won't be able to bring it tomorrow because I got a little work to do tomorrow. But nevertheless, I've been your host, Tarhaka, Amana LB, and until next time, y'all have a good evening.
Baby, you better stop listening to all of that talk out there in the street. You know what those guys are about.
they want the same thing I want. I want you, baby. You feel me? Honey, they're trying to say you might be too much for me, but tonight I'm curious. Yeah. They say you might bring a man down to his knees, but tonight I'm curious. Oh, baby, listen, I know you got it in all the right places, and I ain't gonna doubt it. You know just what you're doing. But tonight, baby, I want you to take me there. Oh, yeah. Honey, they're trying to say you might be too much for me, but tonight I'm curious. Yeah. You might bring me down to my knees, but tonight I'm curious. Listen, I know a trick or two that I might can teach you. I'm gonna take my time, baby, show you just what I can do. So take my hand, girl, let me show you I'm serious. Oh yeah. Honey, they're trying to say you might be too much for me, but tonight I'm curious. Oh baby, they say you might bring a man down to his knees, but tonight I'm curious. Oh baby, woo! Oh girl, girl, I swear, you got to take me there. Let's get it on, baby. Get it on, get it on. It's been too long. Oh, baby, listen. Honey, they're trying to say you might be too much for me, but tonight I'm curious. Yeah. They say you might bring a man down to his knees, but tonight I'm curious. Oh, baby. Hey, baby. It's been too long. Let's get it on. It's been too long. Oh, baby. It's been too long. Oh, baby.
Thank you for walking me to my car.
I'd like to be walking you to your doorstep.
Well, it is the middle of the night.
Are you thinking what I'm thinking?
You get in the car and you'll see.
Scorching hot car interiors can cause devastating injuries or worse in just a matter of minutes. Take extra care in making sure your whole family is out of the car before leaving. Put your purse, wallet, or phone in the back seat as a reminder. If you see a child or pet locked in a car, call 911 immediately. Remember, there's no excuse for leaving anyone behind. Go to flhsmv.gov/child safety for more info. That's flhsmv.gov. A message from the Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles.
We've seen it 1,000 times. Insurance companies using the same tired excuses not to pay. They'll say you're really not hurt, or that your injury is from an old accident. That's why it's so important to hire a law firm who has their own medical experts, who know how to fight excuses with facts. When they bring excuses, we bring the truth. And truth is power. Farah and Farah. Here for you, here for good. Jacksonville.